The granite headstone stood quiet against the November sky, weathered by 2 winters of Iowa wind. Cole Brennan knelt in the frost-hardened grass, his 17-year-old hands steady as he placed a bundle of wildflowers at the base. The carved letters read simply, Frank Merrick, United States Army, Vietnam veteran, beloved husband and father. That last word still caught in Cole's throat every time he read it. Father, a title earned in 10 short months, a bond forged in the space between goodbye and forever. People ask me if I regret it. If I regret giving up my freedom for a dying man. If I regret staying when I could have run, the way I'd run from everything else in my 14 years of life. I tell them the truth, though they rarely understand it. Frank Merrick didn't take my freedom. He gave me something far more valuable. He gave me a reason to use it. But to understand that, you have to go back. Back to the beginning, to a cold November night 3 years ago, when the rain was coming down so hard you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. Back to the moment I stopped running from my life and accidentally ran straight into it. The Riverside Youth Center sat on the eastern edge of Cedar Rapids, like a brick monument to good intentions and broken promises. 32 kids ranging from 8 to 17, packed into a building designed for 20, managed by a staff of 4 overworked counselors who meant well but couldn't possibly mean enough. I had been there 8 months by that November, my third placement since entering the system at 11. The first foster home lasted 6 weeks before the parents decided that raising someone else's damaged kid was harder than the monthly check was worth. The second lasted 4 months until their biological son came home from college and needed his room back. The group home before Riverside had been tolerable, but I aged out of their program when I turned 14. So there I was, Cole Brennan, 14 years old, nobody's son, nobody's problem, and nobody's priority. Just another case file in a system stretched so thin you could see through it. My mother's name was Jennifer. I should probably tell you that, though thinking about her still feels like pressing on a bruise that never quite heals. She'd been 21 when she had me, already deep into the methamphetamine that would define the next decade of both our lives. I don't remember much from before I was 7 or 8, just fragments. The smell of cigarette smoke, the sound of her boyfriends arguing in the kitchen, the hollow feeling of waiting for dinner that wouldn't come. By the time I was 10, I was making my own meals, getting myself to school, learning to be invisible when the wrong people came around. The state took me 3 weeks after my 11th birthday. A teacher noticed the bruises, made the call, and just like that, my mother chose her boyfriend over me. She signed the papers without a fight. I'd like to say it surprised me, but even at 11, I knew where I ranked in her list of priorities. Somewhere below the drugs and the men and the next high, but probably above the overdue electric bill. The system shuffled me through its machinery with bureaucratic efficiency. Interviews with social workers who asked how I felt and wrote down answers that never quite captured the truth. Foster parents who looked at me like a puppy at the pound, wondering if I was worth the trouble. Other kids who'd learned the same survival skills I had, all of us recognizing our own damage in each other's eyes. By November of 2023, I'd been in the system for 3 years. 3 years of temporary bedrooms and borrowed clothes and people who called me sweetie but never son. 3 years of watching other kids get chosen while I stayed on the shelf. 3 years of learning that the only person I could count on was myself, and even that was questionable most days. So I planned my escape with the same careful attention I'd learned to apply to everything that mattered. For 2 weeks, I squirreled away food from the cafeteria. Granola bars slipped into pockets, packets of crackers hidden in my backpack. An apple here, a handful of nuts there. Small enough not to be noticed, enough to keep me alive for a week or two if I rationed carefully. I saved $68 from odd jobs around the facility, helping in the kitchen for an extra $5, pulling weeds in the courtyard for $3. Money that was supposed to go into my account for when I aged out, but I had more immediate needs. I studied the security routines like a general planning a campaign. The overnight supervisor, Mr. Patterson, made his rounds at 10:30, checking each dorm room with a flashlight and a clipboard. By midnight, he was reliably asleep in the office, his snoring audible from the hallway. The emergency exit on the east side had a faulty alarm that maintenance kept meaning to fix. I'd tested it twice during fire drills, slipping out just far enough to confirm it wouldn't betray me. November 15th was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays meant meatloaf in the cafeteria, And I actually liked the meatloaf, which seemed like a strange detail to notice on the night you were planning to disappear from your life. I lay in bed fully clothed, wearing 2 shirts under my warmest hoodie, my only pair of jeans without holes, 2 pairs of socks. My backpack held everything I owned that mattered, which wasn't much. A few changes of clothes, my stash of food, a water bottle I'd filled from the bathroom sink, a flashlight I'd bought at the dollar store, the $68 in a Ziploc bag to keep it dry, and one photograph. The picture showed me at 8 years old with my mother at some county fair. We were both smiling, standing in front of a Ferris wheel, her arm around my shoulders. I couldn't remember the moment being as happy as we looked, but maybe it had been. Maybe there had been a version of us that could have worked in a different life with different choices. I'd kept the photo through everything, even though looking at it hurt. Even though that smiling boy felt like a stranger now. Someone I used to know before the world taught me better. At 12:17 in the morning, I heard Mr. Patterson's distinctive snore echoing from down the hall. I waited another 10 minutes to be sure, my heart hammering so hard I was certain it would wake my roommate, a 7-year-old named Timothy, who slept clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. I wanted to say goodbye to him, to tell him to be brave, to promise him that someday someone would choose him, but I couldn't risk it. If anyone knew, they'd stop me. So I shouldered my backpack as quietly as possible and crept toward the door. The old hardwood floors creaked with every step, each sound impossibly loud in the midnight silence. I moved the way I'd learned to move around my mother's boyfriends, slowly, carefully, making myself small and forgettable. The hallway stretched before me, lit only by emergency exit signs that cast everything in an eerie red glow. I counted my steps, 43 from my room to the kitchen, another 28 to the east exit, each one feeling like a mile. When I finally reached the door, I pressed my ear against the cold metal, listening. Nothing but the sound of rain drumming against the building, steady and relentless. I took a breath, whispered a prayer to a God I wasn't sure I believed in, and pushed. The door opened without a sound. The alarm stayed silent, and just like that, I was free. The rain hit me immediately, cold and hard, soaking through my hoodie within seconds. The temperature hovered somewhere in the low 40s, cold enough to make the rain feel like tiny knives against my skin. I pulled my hood up and started walking, staying close to the building until I reached the tree line that bordered the facility's property. Once I was among the trees, I allowed myself one look back. The Riverside Youth Center glowed with warm light from a few windows where staff worked through the night shift. From the outside, it probably looked safe, maybe even welcoming. A place that cared for children who needed caring for. And maybe it was, for some kids. But for me, it had been just another temporary stop on a journey to nowhere. I turned away and kept walking. Cedar Rapids wasn't a large city, maybe 130,000 people, surrounded by farmland and forest in the kind of small towns that dot Iowa like seeds scattered across a field. I stuck to back roads and residential streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where someone might spot a teenage kid walking alone in the rain at 1 in the morning. The few cars that passed didn't slow down. To them, I was just a shadow moving through the November night, if they saw me at all. By 2:30, I'd made it to the edge of town, where the streetlights ended and the farmland began. I was shivering uncontrollably by then, my teeth chattering so hard I bit my tongue twice. The rain hadn't let up, and I knew I needed shelter soon, or I'd be facing hypothermia before sunrise. That's when I saw it, set back from the road behind what appeared to be an abandoned farmhouse. The barn. It stood against the night sky like a promise, its silhouette darker than the darkness around it. The farmhouse itself was clearly beyond saving, with broken windows and a porch that sagged in the middle like a sway-backed horse. But the barn looked intact, or at least more intact than the house. I made my way across the overgrown yard, my shoes squelching in mud that sucked at my feet with each step. The barn door stood partially open, as if inviting me in. I slipped through the gap and was immediately hit by the smell of old hay and weathered wood, dust and time, and something else I couldn't quite name. Possibility, maybe, or just the absence of rain. I used my flashlight to explore, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a space larger than I'd expected. The ground floor was mostly empty except for some old equipment rusting in the corners and a pile of rotted hay that mice had turned into a metropolis. But there was a loft, accessible by a wooden ladder that looked sturdy enough, and when I climbed up, I found it still had good hay bales stacked in the corner, old and musty, sure, but dry, and more importantly, insulated. I arranged the hay into something resembling a bed, using my backpack as a pillow, and curled up in the driest corner I could find. My wet clothes clung to my skin, making me shiver even harder, but at least I was out of the rain. At least I was somewhere. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about what I'd done, what came next, where I'd go when morning came. I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the pass in the barn's wooden walls. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality came crashing back like a wave I couldn't swim against. I was a runaway. I was soaking wet and freezing cold and hiding in an abandoned barn with no plan and nowhere to go. I sat up slowly, my muscles stiff from sleeping on hay, and assessed my situation in the cold light of day. My clothes were still damp, I was hungry, and through a gap in the barn wall, I could see the farmhouse more clearly now. It had probably been beautiful once. A two-story structure with a wraparound porch and dormer windows. The kind of house that spoke of Sunday dinners and family gatherings and lives well lived. But time and neglect had taken their toll. White paint peeled away in long strips. Several windows were broken, their glass teeth jagged in the frames. The front steps had partially collapsed, making the main entrance inaccessible. The farm itself appeared to cover 40 acres or so, mostly overgrown fields and scattered trees. I could see an old chicken coop that had collapsed on one side, a rusted tractor sitting in grass that came up to its axles, and what looked like it had once been a vegetable garden, now completely overrun with weeds. The gravel driveway connecting the property to the road was so overgrown it was barely visible. Clearly, no one had lived here or maintained the place in years, which made it perfect for someone like me who needed to be nowhere and wasn't supposed to exist. I climbed down from the loft carefully, testing each rung of the ladder before putting my full weight on it. My stomach was growling, so I pulled out one of my granola bars and ate it slowly, trying to make it last. I had maybe 2 weeks' worth of food if I rationed carefully. After that, I'd need to figure something out, but I'd learned not to think too far ahead. In the system, planning for the future was just setting yourself up for disappointment. I spent that first day hiding in the barn, venturing out only to explore the immediate area and make sure no one was around. The isolation was almost perfect. The nearest neighbor's house was probably a quarter-mile down the road, barely visible through the trees. The main road saw maybe one car every half hour. If I was careful, if I stayed out of sight, I could probably survive here for a while. That night, I made my second mistake. I decided to explore the farmhouse. I told myself I was looking for supplies, maybe a blanket or something useful. But truthfully, I was lonely. The barn felt too isolated, too much like being buried alive. And the farmhouse, even abandoned, still felt like it had been a home once. That mattered somehow. I approached cautiously, listening for any signs of life, then tried the back door. It was locked, but the door frame was so rotted that a firm push caused the whole thing to give way with a splintering crack that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet evening. Inside was a time capsule of abandonment. The kitchen still had dishes in the cabinets, pots hanging from hooks, even some canned goods in the pantry that were so old the labels had faded to nothing. The living room had furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. On the mantel, there were photographs showing a family, an older man and woman, maybe in their 60s, and what appeared to be their adult children with families of their own. Holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, ordinary moments frozen in time, waiting for people who would never come back to claim them. I picked up one of the photos, studying the faces. The old man had kind eyes and calloused hands visible even in the photograph. The woman had a warm smile and was wearing an apron dusted with flour. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged to each other. I wondered what had happened to them, why they'd left this place to decay, whether they'd wanted to go or if circumstances had forced them out, the way circumstances had forced me from every home I'd ever known. Upstairs, I found 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom had a large bed with a faded quilt still on it. One room appeared to have belonged to a young boy, with model airplanes hanging from the ceiling and posters of baseball players from what looked like the 1980s. The third room was clearly a guest room, with neutral decor and a single bed made up with clean sheets that had gathered years of dust. I knew I shouldn't stay in the house. If someone came to check on the property, the barn would be easier to hide in. But that guest room bed was calling to me with a voice I couldn't ignore. I hadn't slept in a real bed in 3 years, not since before I'd entered the system. At Riverside, we had thin mattresses on metal frames. The foster homes before that hadn't been much better. But this bed, even with its dusty quilt and musty pillows, represented something I'd almost forgotten existed. Comfort. I made a decision that would change everything. I would stay. At least for a few days. I would clean up the guest room, use it as my base, and figure out what to do next. It was risky, but no riskier than wandering around with nowhere to go. That evening, I found some old linens in a closet, shook them out as best I could, and made up the bed properly. I discovered that the house still had running water, though it came out rust-colored at first. I didn't dare drink it, but I could wash my face and hands. There was no electricity, but I had my flashlight and found some old candles in a drawer. Over the next few days, I fell into a routine that felt almost normal. I would wake up with the sun, eat a small breakfast from my dwindling supplies, and spend the day exploring the property and working on the house. I found an old push broom and swept out the guest room and the kitchen. I washed dishes in cold water and organized the pantry. I even started pulling weeds from what had been the garden, though I wasn't sure why. It just felt good to do something productive, to make some small mark on the world, to prove I existed. On my 5th day at the farm, I walked the 3 miles into Cedar Rapids, keeping my hood up and my head down. I went to the grocery store and bought bread, peanut butter, some apples, and a gallon of water, spending nearly $20 of my precious savings. The cashier, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, barely glanced at me. I was just another customer in a long line of customers, which was exactly what I needed to be. On my way back, I passed a bulletin board outside the post office and stopped to read the notices. There, among the advertisements for piano lessons and used cars, was a flyer about me. Missing, Cole Brennan, 14 years old, last seen at Riverside Youth Center. There was my school picture from last year, the one where I looked even younger than I was, with a forced smile and uncombed hair. The flyer urged anyone with information to contact the police or child services. I stared at that picture for a long time. Cole Brennan. That was me, but it also wasn't. The boy in that photograph still had hope that someone might want him, that some family might choose him for fostering, or even adoption. The person standing in front of the bulletin board knew better. I was on my own. I always had been. I always would be. I pulled the flyer down, crumpled it up, and shoved it in my pocket. Then I walked back to the farm, to the only place that had felt even remotely like home in 3 years. 2 weeks passed, then 3, then 4. I'd been at the farm for almost a month, and somehow I was still there. The missing person flyers had disappeared from around town, replaced by newer notices about other things, other people. It seemed the authorities had moved on, or at least weren't actively searching for me anymore. I was just another runaway kid in a system that had too many of them to keep track of. I'd learned to be careful, to stay out of sight, to make my trips to town infrequent and brief. I discovered a small creek about half a mile from the farmhouse where I could get fresh water. I boiled it in an old pot I'd found in the kitchen, using a small fire I built in the backyard, always at night when the smoke would be less visible. The weather was getting colder as November turned into December. I knew I had a serious problem. The farmhouse had no heat, and my single hoodie wasn't going to be enough to get me through an Iowa winter. I'd found some old blankets in a closet, and I slept under all of them at once. But on particularly cold nights, I could see my breath in the guest room. That's when I discovered the trunk in the attic. I'd been avoiding the attic because the pull-down stairs looked unstable, but desperation drove me up there one afternoon. The space was cramped and dusty, filled with boxes and old furniture. But in the corner sat a large wooden trunk with brass corners and a working latch. Inside, I found treasure: heavy wool sweaters, thermal underwear, thick socks, even an old winter coat that was too big for me, but infinitely better than my thin hoodie. The clothes smelled of mothballs and age, but they were clean and intact. I also found something else in that trunk. Beneath the clothes was a stack of letters tied together with a faded ribbon, and underneath those, a leather journal. The letters were addressed to people named Patterson at this very address. Henry and Margaret Patterson. I sat on the dusty attic floor and began to read, and through those letters, I learned the story of the people who had lived in this house. Henry and Margaret had been farmers who raised corn and soybeans. They'd had 3 children, all of whom had moved away for better opportunities in cities far from this small town. The letters from those children spanned decades, full of updates about grandchildren and career changes and holidays spent apart. But there was a sadness running through them too, a recurring theme of promises to visit that never quite materialized, of busy lives that left little room for elderly parents maintaining a farm by themselves. But it was the journal that really got to me. Margaret's journal, written in a neat, careful hand that spoke of patience and attention to detail. I opened it to a random page and read, May 2015. Doctor says I have 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. Henry doesn't know yet. I'm not sure how to tell. Tell him, we've been on this land for 43 years. Watched our children grow up here. Buried 2 dogs and more cats than I can count. Planted that oak tree out front the year we bought the place. It's taller than the house now. I'm grateful I got to see 82 autumns here. This land has been good to me. Good to us. I just wish someone wanted to keep it going. But the kids have their own lives. I can't blame them for that. I just hope whoever gets it next loves it the way we did. I closed the journal carefully, my hands shaking. Not from the cold this time, but from something else. Something that felt dangerously close to grief for people I'd never met. I cried then. For the first time since running away, I let myself cry. I cried for Margaret and Henry, who had built something beautiful here and had to leave it behind. I cried for their children, who had their own lives and couldn't keep the farm going. And I cried for myself, for the family I never had, for the mother who chose someone else over me, for all the homes that were never really home. When I was done crying, something had shifted inside me. I made a decision that probably sounds crazy, but it made perfect sense in that moment. If this farm didn't belong to anyone anymore, if it was just sitting here waiting for someone to care about it, then I would be that someone. I would take care of this place. I would honor Margaret and Henry's memory by not letting their life's work completely disappear. I started small. I continued cleaning the house room by room until every surface was as clean as I could make it without proper supplies. I organized the kitchen, the living room, even the other bedrooms. I found tools in the barn and started making minor repairs. Fixing a loose cabinet door here, tightening a wobbly chair leg there, replacing a broken window pane using glass from another broken window, and some old putty I found in a toolbox. I'd never done any of this kind of work before, but I discovered I had a knack for figuring things out, for seeing how things fit together, how they were supposed to work, what needed to be fixed to make them whole again. The farm began to respond to my care. It sounds strange to say it that way, but that's how it felt. The more attention I gave to the place, the more it seemed to welcome me. The house felt less abandoned and more like a home. The barn, once creepy and full of shadows, became my workshop where I organized tools and planned projects. Even the overgrown garden started to look less chaotic as I worked on clearing it, pulling weeds and removing dead plants. But I was still alone, and loneliness is a heavy burden to carry, especially at 14. I would go days without speaking to anyone. I found myself talking to the house, to the photographs of Margaret and Henry on the mantle, even to the farm itself. I told them about my day, about my plans, about my fears. It helped, but it wasn't the same as real human connection. Then, on December 15th, something happened that would change everything. I was in the barn trying to fix a broken shelf when I heard a vehicle coming up the driveway. My heart immediately started racing. This was it. Someone had discovered me. I would be sent back to Riverside, or worse, moved to a more secure facility for running away. I quickly hid in the loft, peering through the gaps in the wood to see who it was. A pickup truck pulled up, old but well-maintained, a 1995 Ford in forest green. An elderly man got out, probably in his early 70s, wearing work clothes and a heavy jacket. He stood there for a moment looking at the farmhouse with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he started walking toward it. I held my breath, trying to decide whether to run or stay hidden. That's when I heard him speak, though he seemed to be talking to himself. Well, Margaret, I came by like I promised. Wanted to check on the place before Christmas. I know it's been a while. My mind raced. This man knew Margaret. He'd been here before. He'd promised to check on the farm. Was he the one who owned it now? Would he call the police? I watched as he walked around the property. noting the swept porch, the organized tools visible through the barn door, the cleared garden area. His expression changed from casual observation to confusion, then to concern. "That's odd," he said aloud, still seemingly talking to himself. "Someone's been here recently. By the looks of it, someone's been living here." He approached the back door, saw that it had been forced open, and his concern deepened. He pulled out a cell phone, and I knew I had seconds to make a decision. I could hide and let him call the police, which would end with me being discovered eventually anyway. Or I could show myself and try to explain. Neither option was good, but at least the second one gave me some control over the situation. Before I could talk myself out of it, I climbed down from the loft and stepped out of the barn. The man spun around, his hand instinctively going to his phone. We stood there staring at each other across the yard. He was tall, maybe 6'2", broad-shouldered despite his age, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hair was gray, cut short in a military style. His eyes were a sharp blue that seemed to take in everything at once. His expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been understanding. "Please don't call the police," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "I'll leave. I'll go right now. I just need a few minutes to get my things." He didn't move, didn't speak, just kept looking at me with those sharp blue eyes. Finally, he lowered his phone. "How long have you been here, son?" The kindness in his voice almost broke me. "About 5 weeks. I didn't damage anything, I swear. I've been taking care of the place. I've been cleaning and fixing things. I just needed somewhere to stay." He was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he asked, "Are you the boy from the youth center, Cole Brennan?" My heart sank. He knew who I was. Of course he did. Everyone in this small town probably knew about the missing kid from Riverside. I nodded, unable to speak. To my surprise, he didn't immediately reach for his phone again. Instead, he said, "I'm Frank Merrick. I was a friend of the Pattersons, the people who own this farm. I promised Margaret before she died that I'd check on the place from time to time. Clearly, I haven't been doing a very good job of it if you've been here for 5 weeks without me noticing." Frank Merrick walked slowly toward me, his hands visible and non-threatening, as if he were approaching a skittish animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Why don't you show me what you've been doing here?" he said quietly. "Then we can figure out what happens next." I led him through the farmhouse, showing him the rooms I'd cleaned, the repairs I'd made, the way I'd organized things. He didn't say much, just nodded occasionally and examined my work with what seemed like a professional eye. When we reached the guest room where I'd been sleeping, he paused in the doorway, taking in the neatly made bed, my few possessions arranged carefully on the dresser, the clothes hanging in the closet. "You've been living like this for 5 weeks?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that sounded like sadness. "In the cold, with no electricity, no proper food?" I shrugged, trying to appear tougher than I felt. "It's better than where I was." He turned to look at me then, really look at me, the way no one had looked at me in a very long time, and I saw something shift in his expression. "Come on," he said. "Let's go sit in my truck where it's warm, and you can tell me your story." We sat in his pickup with the heater running, and for the first time in 5 weeks, I felt genuinely warm. Frank didn't pressure me, just waited patiently until I was ready to talk. And then, somehow, everything came spilling out. I told him about my mother and her boyfriends, about entering the system at 11, about the foster homes that didn't work out, about Riverside and the overwhelming feeling that I was disappearing into a system that didn't see me as a person, just a case file. I told him about finding the farm, about discovering Margaret and Henry's letters, about deciding to take care of the place because no one else seemed to want it. When I finished, Frank was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Margaret Patterson was one of the finest people I ever knew. She and Henry both were. They loved this farm more than anything, except maybe their kids and grandkids. It broke their hearts when they had to leave." He paused, looking out at the farmhouse. "Their daughter Sarah lives in Arizona now with her own family. The kids didn't want the farm. It went into foreclosure about 6 months ago. Bank owns it now. They've been meaning to auction it off, but these things take time. Paperwork and lawyers and bureaucracy." "I'm sorry I broke in," I said. "I just didn't have anywhere else to go." Frank shook his head. "I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is what happens to you now. You know I should call child services, right? You're a minor and you ran away from a state facility. That's serious." I felt tears welling up, but I fought them back. "Please don't send me back there. I know I can't stay here forever. I know this isn't my farm, but please just give me a few more days. Just through Christmas. After that, I'll turn myself in. I promise. I just can't go back there on Christmas. Something in my plea must have reached him, because he sighed deeply and rubbed his face with both hands. "Let me make a phone call," he said. "Stay here." He got out of the truck and walked a short distance away, his phone to his ear. I watched him through the windshield, seeing him gesture as he talked, his expression serious. The conversation went on for at least 10 minutes, and with each passing moment, my anxiety grew. Finally, he came back to the truck and climbed in. "Okay," he said, "here's what's going to happen. That was my wife, Eleanor, I just called. I told her about you, about what you've been doing here, about your situation. We've talked it over, and we'd like to offer you a deal." I stared at him, not quite believing what I was hearing. "You can't stay here alone anymore," Frank continued. "It's not safe and it's not legal. Winter's coming on hard, and you'll freeze to death in that house. So you're going to stay with me and Eleanor. We live about 10 miles from here. We've got a spare room, a warm bed, hot meals. No questions, no judgment. You help me with some projects around our place and here at the farm. I teach you carpentry and whatever else you want to learn. Come spring, you decide what's next, stay or go. Your choice, but until then, you're under our roof. Deal?" I couldn't speak. This man, this stranger, was offering me more than anyone had offered me in 3 years. A place to stay, supervision that didn't feel like incarceration, and the chance to keep working on the farm that had become important to me. "Why?" I finally managed to ask. "Why would you do this for me?" Frank looked at me with those kind blue eyes and said, "Because 30 years ago, someone did it for me. I came back from Vietnam pretty messed up, angry, lost, didn't know how to be a person anymore. A man named John Patterson took a chance on me, taught me carpentry, gave me purpose, helped me find my way back. John was Henry's older brother, passed away 15 years ago. But I never forgot what he did for me. Now it's my turn to pass it on." He paused, then added, "And because I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere, and because sometimes people need someone to take a chance on them, I'm taking a chance on you, Cole Brennan. Don't make me regret it." That afternoon, Frank drove me to his house. It was a modest ranch-style home with a well-kept yard and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. There were no Christmas lights, no decorations, just a simple, solid house that looked like people actually lived there and cared about it. His wife, Eleanor, met us at the door. She was a small woman, maybe 5'4", with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked me up and down, taking in my too thin frame and worn clothes and the wariness in my eyes. "You must be freezing and starving," she said immediately, in a voice that somehow managed to be both firm and gentle. Come in, come in. I've got beef stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." The smell of that food, real homemade food, almost made me cry right there on the doorstep. Eleanor showed me to their spare room while Frank brought in my backpack from the truck. The room was small but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser with some clothes already laid out that looked about my size, and even some books on the nightstand. The window overlooked their backyard, where I could see a workshop and a neatly maintained garden plot waiting for spring. "These were our sons," Eleanor explained, gesturing to the clothes. "He's grown now, living in Minneapolis. But I kept some of his things. I think they'll fit you well enough until we can get you your own." Our son. She said it so casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world to share her son's clothes with a stranger. Like I was already part of something instead of just passing through. That night, I sat at their dinner table and ate the best meal I'd had in years. Frank and Eleanor didn't interrogate me or make me feel like a charity case. They just talked about normal things, about their son David and his job as an engineer, about the town, about their plans for Christmas. They included me in the conversation as if I'd always been there, as if I belonged. After dinner, Eleanor showed me how to use the shower, gave me fresh towels, and told me to take as long as I wanted. I stood under that hot water until it started to run cold, watching 3 years of accumulated loneliness and fear wash down the drain. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a borrowed robe, I found Eleanor had laid out pajamas on my bed. Real pajamas. Not just clothes to sleep in, but actual flannel pajamas that were soft and warm and smelled like fabric softener. I climbed into bed that night, in a real bedroom, in a real home, with real people who had chosen to help me despite having no obligation to do so. I could hear Frank and Eleanor talking quietly in their room down the hall, the kind of comfortable conversation that comes from decades of partnership. The house made settling sounds around me, the creak of cooling wood, the hum of the furnace, all the small noises that make a structure feel alive and inhabited. For the first time since I could remember, I felt safe. The next morning, I woke to the smell of breakfast cooking. I got dressed quickly in the clothes Eleanor had left for me, a pair of jeans and a warm flannel shirt that fit reasonably well. When I entered the kitchen, Frank was already at the table reading the newspaper, and Eleanor was at the stove making pancakes. "Good morning, Cole," she said brightly. "I hope you like blueberry pancakes." Frank can't get enough of them. It was so normal, so ordinary, that I almost couldn't process it. Over breakfast, Frank laid out his plan. "We've got about a week and a half before Christmas. Today, I'm going to take you to meet a social worker named Linda Hayes. She's going to arrange an emergency foster placement with Eleanor and me. It'll be temporary at first, 90 days. Then we'll see where things stand. You'll need to go back to school after the holiday break. Cedar Rapids High. It's a good school. You'll be fine." He paused, taking a sip of coffee. "But first, we're going to go out to the farm. We're going to make a list of what needs to be done. Real repairs, not just cleaning. I've got tools and materials, and I know how to use them. If you're serious about taking care of that place, we're going to do it right, and I'm going to teach you how. Deal?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Frank smiled. "Good, finish your breakfast. We've got work to do." As I ate those blueberry pancakes, watching Frank and Eleanor share their morning coffee and quiet conversation with the ease of 50 years together, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. Hope. Maybe this wouldn't last. Maybe I'd mess it up, the way I'd messed up everything else. Maybe they'd realize I wasn't worth the trouble and send me back. But for this moment, sitting in this warm kitchen with these two people who barely knew me but had chosen to help me anyway, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of something different. The possibility of home. Frank finished his coffee and stood up. "Ready to learn some carpentry?" I stood up too, meeting his eyes. "Yes, sir." He smiled. "Then let's go build something." And just like that, my life began again. The workshop behind Frank's house smelled like sawdust and oil, wood shavings and possibility. It was a two-car garage that he'd converted years ago, with pegboards holding tools in precise arrangements, a workbench scarred by decades of projects, and enough equipment to build just about anything a man could imagine. I stood in the doorway that first morning, overwhelmed by the sight of it all. Every tool had its place. Every space had its purpose. It was the opposite of every chaotic room I'd ever lived in. Frank was already inside, pulling on his work gloves. He gestured to a smaller pair hanging on a hook. "Those are yours now. We'll start with the basics. How to hold a hammer without breaking your thumb. How to measure twice and cut once. How to see what something could be instead of what it is." I pulled on the gloves. They were stiff and new, sized exactly right for my 14-year-old hands. Someone had bought these for me. Someone had gone to a store and looked at work gloves and thought about me and what I'd need. The realization hit harder than it should have. We spent that first morning learning the names of tools. Not just hammer and saw, but the specifics. Claw hammer versus ball peen. Crosscut saw versus rip saw. Tape measure, speed square, evaluate, chalk line. Frank would pick up each one, demonstrate its use, then hand it to me and watch as I tried to mirror his movements. He never raised his voice when I got something wrong. He'd just say, "Try again," and wait patiently while I figured it out. Around noon, Eleanor brought us sandwiches and thermoses of hot coffee. She'd cut the crust off my sandwich without asking, the way you might for a child. I almost told her I didn't need that I wasn't a baby. But then I took a bite and realized she'd made it exactly the way I liked it, even though she had no way of knowing. Turkey and cheese, light on the mayo, with crisp lettuce. She just guessed right. Or maybe she'd paid attention to how I'd eaten at breakfast, noting what I reached for first, what I avoided. The attention felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like a language I used to speak but had almost forgotten. That afternoon, Frank drove me into Cedar Rapids to meet with Linda Hayes. Her office was in a low brick building that housed the Department of Human Services, the kind of place I'd been to a dozen times before for interviews and assessments in the bureaucratic machinery of being nobody's kid. But this time felt different somehow. This time I was walking in with someone beside me instead of being led by a social worker's firm hand. Linda Hayes was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen enough to be skeptical, but not enough to be cynical yet. She shook my hand first, then Frank's, and gestured for us to sit. Cole, I've read your file. I know you've had a rough few years. Running away was dangerous and illegal, but I understand why you did it. The system failed you. Multiple placements, no stability, no real support. That's on us, not you. She turned to Frank. Mr. Merrick, you're 72 years old. Your wife is 68. You're both retired and on fixed incomes. Taking on a teenage foster child is not a small commitment, especially one who's demonstrated flight risk. Can you tell me why you want to do this? Frank was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. My wife and I lost our son 15 years ago. Car accident. He was 19. For a long time after that, we just existed. Got up, went through the motions, went to bed, repeated. Then one day I realized Danny wouldn't want us to stop living just because he did. He'd want us to keep building things, keep helping people. When I found Cole at the Patterson farm, I saw a kid who needed someone to believe in him. I've got the time, I've got the skills, and I've got the spare room. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Linda studied him for a long moment, then turned to me. Cole, do you want to stay with the Merricks? Yes, ma'am. Even if it means going back to school? Following rules? Meeting with me twice a month to check in? Yes, ma'am. She looked between us, then pulled out a stack of paperwork. All right, I'm approving emergency foster placement for 90 days. After that, we'll reassess and potentially move to a longer-term arrangement. Mr. and Mrs. Merrick, you'll receive a small monthly stipend to help with expenses. Cole, you'll re-enroll at Cedar Rapids High after winter break. You'll maintain passing grades, attend all scheduled appointments with me, and follow the Merrick's household rules. If you run again, if you get into serious trouble, this arrangement ends. Do you understand? I understand. She slid the papers across her desk. Then let's make it official. Frank signed in where she indicated, his handwriting steady and sure. When it was my turn, my hand shook slightly as I wrote my name. Cole Brennan. Such a simple thing, a signature. But it felt like I was signing myself into existence somehow, like I was making myself real. The first week at the Merrick house taught me just how much I'd forgotten about living with other people. I'd spent so long in survival mode, so focused on getting through each day alone, that the rhythms of family life felt almost alien. Frank and Eleanor ate breakfast together every morning at 7. They read the newspaper together, sharing sections and commenting on articles. They asked each other about plans for the day, coordinated grocery runs, and appointments in the thousand small logistics of shared life. And now they included me in that coordination. What do you want for dinner tonight, Cole? Do you need anything from the store? Are you comfortable enough in your room, or do you need more blankets? At first, I didn't know how to answer. I'd spent 3 years learning not to want things, not to ask for things, not to expect things. But Eleanor had a gift for patience. She'd ask the same questions day after day until I started to believe she actually wanted to know the answers. I caught myself hoarding food in my room that first week, slipping extra rolls from dinner into my pocket, hiding granola bars in my dresser drawer, old habits from the youth center, from the times before that when my mother would forget to buy groceries and I'd go hungry. Eleanor found my stash when she was putting away clean laundry. She didn't scold me. She just sat on the edge of my bed and said, Cole, the food isn't going anywhere. This is your home now. There will always be enough to eat. You don't have to save it for later because later is guaranteed. Do you understand? I've heard that before. I'm sure you have. But we mean it, and we'll keep meaning it every single day until you believe us. She left the granola bars in my drawer. The next day I found she'd added a few more. Her way of saying I could keep them if I needed to, if it made me feel safer. But also her way of showing me that safety came from the promise of more, not the fear of scarcity. Frank took me back to the Patterson farm on the 3rd day. We walked through every room, every outbuilding, making notes on a yellow legal pad. He'd point at something and explain what was wrong, what needed fixing, how we'd go about repairing it. His assessment was thorough and honest. Foundation solid. That's good. Roof needs patching in at least 3 places, or you'll have water damage come spring. Porch steps are rotted through, dangerous. Several windows need replacing. Plumbing probably works but should be checked. Electrical is outdated and potentially unsafe. Barn roof needs complete replacement. Chicken coop is a lost cause, but we could rebuild it. Fencing around the property is mostly gone, would need to be reinstalled if anyone planned to keep livestock. He flipped to a fresh page and wrote a header. Winter projects. Then he looked at me. We've got about 3 months before spring. I'm thinking we focus on making the barn weathertight and rebuilding the porch. Those are big projects, but manageable. I'll teach you as we go. Sound good? Yes, sir. He handed me the legal pad. Write down what we need. Lumber, nails, shingles, tools we don't have. Making lists is the first step in any project. You have to see the whole picture before you can start working on the pieces. I took the pad and pen, my handwriting shaky compared to his block print, but I wrote it all down exactly as he dictated. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building towards something instead of just surviving through it. Christmas crept up on me that year. I'd stopped paying attention to holidays somewhere around age 12, after my third Christmas in the system, when I realized that decorations and presents didn't change the fundamental fact of being unwanted. But Eleanor had other plans. On December 20th, she asked me to help bring boxes down from the attic. Decorations, she explained, from 40 years of married Christmases. We spent the afternoon unwrapping ornaments and untangling light strings while Frank assembled their artificial tree. Each ornament came with a story. This one was from our first Christmas together. This one Danny made in 3rd grade. This one we bought on vacation in Colorado. She held up a wooden angel, its paint faded, but its smile still bright. This was my mother's. She gave it to me the year I got married. Told me to hang it on top of the tree every year, and remember that angels are just ordinary people who choose to help others. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, I'm hanging this angel for you this year, Cole, because I think you're going to help us remember how to celebrate Christmas again. We've been going through the motions for a long time. Maybe you'll help us remember what it means. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and helped her hang the angel. Christmas Eve came cold and clear, the kind of Iowa night where the stars seemed close enough to touch. Eleanor announced we'd be making cookies, a tradition she and Danny used to share. Frank bowed out gracefully, claiming he was better at eating cookies than making them, and retreated to his workshop. Eleanor set out ingredients and tools with the precision of a carpenter laying out a project. Flour, sugar, butter, eggs, mixing bowls and cookie cutters in a dozen shapes. She taught me how to cream butter and sugar, how to know when dough was the right consistency, how to roll it out evenly. What traditions did your family have? She asked as we worked. I paused, my hands dusted with flour. We didn't really have traditions. My mom usually forgot it was Christmas. Eleanor's expression shifted, something that looked like heartbreak crossing her face. Well, she said quietly, you have traditions now. Every Christmas Eve, we make cookies. Every Christmas morning, Frank makes his famous cinnamon rolls. Every Christmas night, we drive around looking at lights. That's how we do it. And now that's how you do it too. I focused on cutting out star shapes from the dough, blinking back something that might have been tears. When I spoke, my voice came out rough. Why are you being so nice to me? Eleanor stopped her own rolling pin mid-stroke. Oh, honey, because you deserve it. Because every child deserves to have someone make cookies with them on Christmas Eve. Because you've had to be strong for so long, and here you don't have to be. You can just be a kid, our kid, for as long as you want. That night, I helped Eleanor arrange the cookies on plates. We made stars and trees and bells and snowmen, decorating them with frosting and sprinkles. When Frank came in from the workshop, he proclaimed them the finest cookies he'd ever seen, and promptly ate 3. Before bed, Eleanor handed me a stocking. Red velvet with my name embroidered across the top in white thread. I stared at it, unable to process how she'd had time to make this, to personalize it, to include me in their family traditions so completely. Everyone needs a stocking, she said simply. Hang it next to ours. I hung it on the mantle beside theirs, 3 stockings in a row. Frank and Eleanor and Cole, like I'd always been there, like I belonged. I woke on Christmas morning to the smell of cinnamon rolls baking and the sound of Frank's terrible singing coming from the kitchen. When I emerged from my room, still in the flannel pajamas Eleanor had given me, I found the living room transformed. The tree lights were on, casting a warm glow across wrapped presents that definitely hadn't been there the night before. Eleanor appeared with mugs of hot chocolate. Don't get too excited. We kept it simple this year, but we wanted you to have a real Christmas. I sat on the floor by the tree while Frank and Eleanor settled on the couch, and we opened presents in turns. For me, there were practical things: a new winter coat that actually fit, work boots with good tread, a set of thermal underwear for cold days at the farm, a journal with my initials embossed on the cover, and then something I hadn't expected: a framed photograph. It showed the Patterson farm, but not as I'd found it. This was from years ago, maybe decades, when the paint was fresh and the porch was solid and an elderly couple stood in front of it smiling at the camera. Henry and Margaret Patterson, I assumed, the people whose home I'd borrowed, whose memory I'd been honoring without quite knowing it. I found that in some old photos Margaret's daughter sent me, Frank explained. Figured you might like to see what the place looked like when it was loved. Something to work toward. I couldn't speak, could only stare at the photograph and imagine bringing that farm back to life, making it whole again, proving that broken things could be fixed if someone cared enough to do the work. Thank you, I finally managed, for all of this, for taking a chance on me. Frank leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. Cole, I want you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't us being nice to the poor foster kid. This is family. You're part of our family now. That means you get presents on Christmas. That means you get expectations and responsibilities and rules. That means you get people who show up for you day after day, no matter what. That means you get to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop, because there is no other shoe. This is it. This is home, understand? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Now let's eat those cinnamon rolls before they get cold. After the holiday break, I enrolled at Cedar Rapids High School as a freshman, 3 months late into the academic year. The school was bigger than I'd expected. Nearly 2,000 students spread across a sprawling brick complex. Linda Hayes had arranged for me to meet with a guidance counselor who helped build my schedule around the credits I'd earned at my previous schools. I was behind in math, ahead in English, average in everything else. The counselor, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, who was absolutely no relation to the farm Pattersons, assured me I could catch up if I was willing to work hard. I'm willing, she smiled. Then you'll be just fine. The first week was brutal. I'd spent 5 weeks in isolation, followed by 3 weeks in the comfortable cocoon of the Merrick household. Being thrust into hallways full of teenagers, all of whom seemed to know each other and know exactly where they belonged, felt like sensory overload. I kept my head down, spoke to no one unless spoken to first, and counted the minutes until I could leave. On the third day, a group of upperclassmen cornered me by my locker. The leader was a thick-necked football player type who looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. You're the foster kid, right? The one living with old man Merrick? I didn't answer, just tried to close my locker and leave. He stepped in front of me. Asked you a question? Trailer trash. You too good to answer? Everything in me wanted to swing at him, to plant my fist in his smug face and make him hurt the way I'd been hurting for years. My hands clenched, my muscles coiled, and then I heard Frank's voice in my head from a conversation we'd had just the night before when I'd mentioned being nervous about school. You're going to meet people who try to make themselves feel big by making you feel small. Don't give them the satisfaction. Walking away from a fight you can win takes more strength than winning it. I looked the football player in the eye. I'm not trash, I'm just new. Excuse me. I walked around him and down the hallway, my heart pounding, expecting to be jumped from behind. But nothing happened. His friends laughed at him for letting me go, and by the next day, they'd moved on to some other target. That night at dinner, Frank asked how school went. Fine. He studied me for a moment. Heard you had some trouble with Trent Morrison. How did you already know that? Small town. His dad bowls in my league. Word gets around. He gave you a hard time? Tried to. I walked away. Frank nodded approvingly. Good man. You'll do all right there. And somehow, knowing he'd heard about it and was proud of how I'd handled it, made the whole thing feel like a victory instead of a humiliation. Math was my weakest subject, and it became clear quickly that I'd need help if I was going to pass. The teacher, Mr. Reynolds, suggested I spend time in the library after school using the tutoring resources available. So on Thursday of my second week, I found myself in the Cedar Rapids High Library, staring at an algebra textbook that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. I'd been staring at the same problem for 20 minutes when a voice interrupted my frustration. You're going to burn a hole in that page if you stare any harder. I looked up to find a girl about my age, maybe 15, with dark curly hair pulled back in a ponytail and brown eyes that seemed amused by my struggle. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt from some veterinary clinic, and she carried a stack of books that suggested she actually knew how to use a library. I'm Cole. And yeah, algebra is not my strong suit. She set her books down and slid into the chair across from me. Claire, and I'm pretty good at math. Want some help? Why would you help me? She shrugged. Because you look like you need it. And because I'm procrastinating on an essay I don't want to write. Trade you. I'll help with your algebra if you help with my essay on To Kill a Mockingbird. I haven't read that. Perfect. Then you can give me a fresh perspective without overthinking it. She pulled my textbook around to face her and looked at the problem I'd been wrestling with. Okay, so this is actually pretty simple once you understand the logic. Think of it like building something. You've got these pieces and you need to arrange them in the right order to get your answer. Each step is like a measurement. Get one wrong and the whole thing doesn't fit together. She explained it in a way that actually made sense, using analogies to construction and tools and things I understood. Within 10 minutes, I'd solved 3 problems that had been baffling me for half an hour. How'd you learn to explain math like that? My dad's a veterinarian. He's always telling me you have to speak the language your audience understands. You look like a hands-on kind of person, so I used hands-on language. She was right. I was hands-on. Frank had been teaching me that exact approach with carpentry. See the pieces, understand how they fit, put them together in the right order. Claire and I fell into an easy routine after that. 3 days a week, we'd meet in the library after school. She'd help me with math and science. I'd help her talk through her English essays. We didn't talk much about personal things at first, just focused on the work. But gradually, in the spaces between polynomial equations and thesis statements, we started to share pieces of ourselves. She told me her mom had died of cancer 3 years ago, that she lived with her dad and helped him run his veterinary practice, that she knew what it was like to be the caretaker, the responsible one, the kid who had to grow up too fast. I told her about the foster system, about finding the farm, about Frank and Eleanor taking me in. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. And she listened without judgment, without pity, with just the simple acknowledgement that life was hard sometimes and you did what you had to do to survive it. By the end of January, Claire felt like a friend, maybe my first real friend in years, someone who chose to spend time with me not because they were paid to or obligated to, but just because they wanted to. Back at the farm, Frank and I worked steadily through the winter projects. We started with the barn roof, which turned out to be a massive undertaking. The existing shingles had to be stripped off, the decking inspected and repaired, new tar paper laid down, and fresh shingles installed row by careful row. Frank taught me how to walk on a pitched roof without falling to my death, how to use a roofing nailer, how to overlap shingles properly so water would run off instead of seeping in. The work was hard and cold and occasionally terrifying, but it was also satisfying in a way I'd never experienced. Every completed row was visible progress. Every day's work brought the barn closer to being weather-tight. We worked in 4-hour chunks, arriving at the farm after I got out of school and working until the winter sun set around 5:30. Frank would climb up on the roof with me, moving more slowly than he probably used to, but still capable and sure-footed. He'd position shingles and I'd nail them down, both of us falling into a rhythm that required no words. Sometimes Eleanor would come out to the farm too, bringing thermoses of hot soup and sandwiches. She'd set up a folding table in the barn, and we'd take our breaks there, warming our hands around the thermoses and talking about progress. She started bringing her camera, documenting the restoration with the thoroughness of a historian. Before pictures, during pictures, eventually after pictures, she said she wanted to show the Patterson children what we were doing with their parents' legacy, how we were bringing it back from the edge of ruin. But I think she also wanted to document my transformation. The before and after of a kid who'd been breaking down just like the farm, both of us getting put back together board by board, shingle by shingle. Frank was patient with my mistakes, and I made plenty of them. Miscut boards, crooked nails, measurements that were off by fractions that turned into problems. But he never made me feel stupid or incompetent. He'd just say, "That's all right, we'll fix it," and show me how. One afternoon in late January, I missed a nail and hit my thumb instead. The pain was sharp and immediate, and I cursed loudly enough that Frank looked over with raised eyebrows. "You all right there?" Hit my thumb. He climbed over to inspect the damage. "You're going to lose that nail. Hurts like hell, I know, but you'll live. I've done it probably 50 times. Doesn't it make you mad, messing up like that?" Frank looked at me seriously. "Cole, there's two types of people in this world. People who never try anything because they're afraid of messing up, and people who mess up regularly because they're actually trying to build something. I know which type I'd rather be. Your thumb will heal. The lesson you just learned about paying attention, about the cost of being careless, that's permanent. That's valuable. So no, it doesn't make me mad. It makes you a carpenter." By mid-February, we'd finished the barn roof. Standing back to look at it, pristine and complete, felt like graduating from something. The barn was weather-tight now, protected, ready to serve its purpose again. Frank put his hand on my shoulder. "You did good work here, son. Real good work." "We did good work. Number. Listen to me. I supervised. You did. These hands," he gestured at my work-roughened palms, "did this. You're learning fast. You've got the gift." Got the gift for building, for seeing what something could be instead of what it is, for having the patience and discipline to make it real. That's rare, Cole. That's valuable. Don't waste it. I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded and we packed up the tools together, working in the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other. But I'd started noticing things. Small things that probably didn't mean anything but collected in my mind anyway. Frank tired more easily than he had in December. He'd need to sit down after an hour of work, claiming he was just catching his breath. He had a cough that lingered, the kind that rattled in his chest and made Eleanor's face tighten with concern every time she heard it. In early February, I'd gone into the bathroom to wash up after working at the farm and found a pill bottle that had fallen behind the toilet. Ondansetron, 8 milligrams, prescribed to Frank Merrick. I picked it up, read the label, and my stomach dropped. I knew that medication. I'd seen it in the group home, given to one of the counselors who was going through chemotherapy. Ondansetron was for nausea, specifically the kind of severe nausea that came from cancer treatment. I put the bottle back where I'd found it and didn't say anything. Couldn't say anything. Because if I asked and Frank confirmed what I was afraid of, then it would be real. And I wasn't ready for it to be real. So I pushed it out of my mind and focused on what I could control. School, work at the farm, learning everything Frank could teach me. On February 28th, we finished the farmhouse porch. The old steps had been completely torn out and rebuilt from scratch, using pressure-treated lumber that would last decades. The railings were solid and secure. The porch boards themselves were level and properly spaced for drainage. Frank and I stood in the front yard, looking at our handiwork as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property. "You've done more in 3 months than I could have imagined," Frank said quietly. "This place was dying when I found you here. Now look at it. The barn's weather-tight. The porch is solid. Come spring, we'll tackle the fence and maybe rebuild that chicken coop. By summer, this place will be close to what it was when Margaret and Henry were here." I felt a surge of pride that was almost painful in its intensity. "We're bringing it back." Frank turned to look at me, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe? Or pride? Or both? "Cole, I need you to understand something. You have a gift for building, for taking broken things and making them whole. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever waste it. The world needs people who can fix what's broken. Be that person." "I will, I promise." He nodded, satisfied. Then he pulled me into a brief, tight hug. The kind of hug a father gives a son. The kind I'd been waiting 14 years to receive. "I'm proud of you, son. Real proud." When he let go, I saw Eleanor standing by the truck, watching us with tears streaming down her face. She'd been there the whole time, documenting this moment with her camera, capturing the instant when a broken kid and a dying man stood in front of a restored porch and called each other family. That night at dinner, I noticed Frank barely touched his food. Eleanor kept glancing at him with concerned eyes, but he waved her off with assurances that he was just tired. After I went to bed, I heard them talking in low voices in the kitchen. I should have stayed in my room, should have given them privacy. But something in Eleanor's tone made me creep down the hallway close enough to hear. "Frank, you need to tell him." "Not yet. Let him have this. Let him have a few more months of normal. He deserves to know. We all deserve honesty. And he'll have it. Soon. Just not tonight. Tonight, let's just be grateful for what we have." I retreated to my room before they could catch me eavesdropping. But sleep was impossible. Something was wrong with Frank. Something serious enough that Eleanor thought I needed to know about it. Something Frank was hiding because he wanted to protect me. The next morning was March 1st. I got up early, planning to make breakfast as a way to distract myself from the previous night's overheard conversation. But as I passed the bathroom, I heard Eleanor's voice, sharp with distress. "Frank Merrick, what the hell is on Dancitron?" I froze in the hallway, knowing I should walk away, but unable to make myself move. "Eleanor, please." "Don't you dare, Eleanor." "Me, how long?" A pause, then Frank's voice, heavy with resignation. 3 months. 3 months. You got diagnosed in November before Cole came? Yes. Eleanor's voice broke. What did they say? Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. 6 to 12 months, maybe less. The world tilted sideways. I grabbed the wall to steady myself, my breath coming in short gasps. Frank was dying. He'd known he was dying when he found me at the farm. He'd known he was dying when he offered to help me. He'd known he was dying when he promised me a home. He'd chosen to spend his last months, his last precious moments of life, on me. On a kid he didn't know, on someone who might not even be worth saving. Eleanor was crying now, her sobs muffled against what I imagined was Frank's chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd make me stop. Stop working. Stop living." "I can't do that, Eleanor. I need to build something before I go." And then Cole showed up, and I realized he's what I'm supposed to build. A man. A good man. "I can't lose you." "I know, sweetheart. I know. But you're not losing me yet. I'm still here. And I'm going to be here as long as I can. For you, for Cole, for the life we built together." I couldn't listen anymore. I turned and went back to my room as quietly as I could, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. My mind was racing through 100 thoughts at once. Frank was dying. He'd known he was dying, and he'd chosen to love me anyway. He'd known he was going to leave, and he'd promised to stay. He'd known our time was limited, and he'd spent it teaching me how to build things that would last longer than he would. I pulled out the journal he'd given me for Christmas and opened to a blank page. My hand moved almost of its own accord, writing words I didn't fully understand but needed to express. "Today I learned my dad is dying. I say my dad because that's what he is, even though we've only known each other 3 months. He's more of a father than anyone else has ever been. And he's leaving. 6 to 12 months, I heard Eleanor say. Maybe less. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone when I know I'm going to lose them. I've spent my whole life learning to not get attached because everyone leaves eventually. But Frank made me care. He made me hope. He made me believe that maybe this time would be different. And now he's dying. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. He knew. He knew he was dying when he found me. He knew his time was running out. And he chose to spend it on me. He chose to teach me, to build with me, to love me. Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone choose to love someone they know they're going to leave? I heard his voice in my head, answering a question I'd asked weeks ago. Because sometimes people need someone to take a chance on them. He'd taken a chance on me knowing he wouldn't get to see how I turned out. Knowing he was building something he'd never see completed. Knowing every moment he gave me was a moment he'd never get back. That's love, I realized. That's what love actually is. Showing up even when it hurts. Giving even when there's nothing left to receive. Building even when you know you won't be there to see the finished product. Frank was teaching me his final lesson. How to love someone even when goodbye is coming. How to be brave enough to care even when loss is guaranteed. How to keep building even when everything is falling apart. I closed the journal and wiped my eyes. I could hear Frank and Eleanor talking quietly in the kitchen now, their voices calmer. They didn't know I knew. They were still trying to protect me, to give me a little more time before the weight of this knowledge crashed down. I'd let them have that. I'd pretend I didn't know. I'd keep going to school and working at the farm and learning everything Frank could teach me. I'd be the son he was trying to build, even though my foundation was cracking under the pressure of this secret. But deep inside, in a place I was trying desperately to ignore, a clock had started ticking. 6 to 12 months, maybe less. Every moment with Frank was now counted, measured, precious beyond words. I walked to my window and looked out at the workshop where Frank taught me to see what things could be instead of what they were, where he'd shown me that broken things could be fixed if someone cared enough to do the work. He was fixing me, I realized, piece by piece, day by day, teaching me not just how to build furniture and repair houses, but how to build a life, how to repair the damage done by years of being nobody's son. And even though he was dying, even though our time was limited, even though goodbye was coming faster than either of us wanted, he was going to keep building me until he couldn't anymore. I made a decision then, standing at that window with my journal in my hands and tears on my face. I would learn everything he had to teach me. I would absorb every lesson, remember every word, honor every moment we had left. And when he was gone, when the man who'd chosen to be my father had breathed his last breath, I would keep building. I would build the man he believed I could become. I would fix broken things the way he'd fixed me. I would show up for people the way he'd shown up for me. That would be his legacy. Not the houses we repaired or the roofs we replaced, but the kind of man I became because he'd loved me enough to teach me. The sun was rising fully now, casting golden light across the workshop and the yard, and the life Frank and Eleanor had built together. A life they'd chosen to share with me. A life that was about to get a lot harder. But I was ready, or at least I was going to try to be ready, because that's what Frank had taught me. You don't wait until you're ready, you just start building and figure it out as you go. And we still had time, 6 to 12 months, maybe less, but maybe more. And I was going to make every single one of those months count. I was going to be the son he deserved, the student he'd invested in, the man he was building me to become. I heard Eleanor call my name from the kitchen. Breakfast was ready. Frank was probably already at the table, reading his newspaper, pretending everything was normal. And I would go down there and pretend too. I would eat pancakes and talk about the day's plans and maintain the fiction that our time together was unlimited. But underneath that fiction, I'd be counting, memorizing, holding on to every moment like the treasure it was. Because Frank Merrick was teaching me his final lesson. How to love someone even when you know you're going to lose them. How to stay even when leaving would be easier. How to keep building even when everything is falling apart. And I was going to learn it, every bit of it, even if it killed me, especially because it was killing him. March arrived with the kind of cold that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. The kind of cold that makes you question whether spring will ever actually come or if winter has decided to stay forever. I went through the motions of normal life with a secret lodged in my chest like a stone. School, homework, dinner with Frank and Eleanor, work at the farm on weekends. To anyone watching, I was just a foster kid settling into his new life. But underneath the surface, I was drowning. Every morning I watched Frank at the breakfast table, looking for signs of decline. Was he eating less than yesterday? Did his hands shake when he lifted his coffee cup? Was that cough worse than it had been last week? I cataloged every symptom like a doctor preparing for the inevitable, trying to measure how much time we had left in coffee cups, in coughing fits, in moments of visible pain he tried to hide. He didn't know I knew. Neither of them did. They went on pretending everything was normal, and I went on pretending I believed them. We were all liars in that house, telling the same lie from different angles. The lie that we had forever. The lie that time wasn't running out like sand through fingers we couldn't close. On the night of March 2nd, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my backpack with the same careful attention I'd used when I ran away from Riverside. A few changes of clothes, the money I'd saved from the small allowance Frank and Eleanor gave me, the photograph of the restored Patterson farm, my journal, everything that mattered, which still wasn't much. I told myself I was doing them a favor. Frank was dying and he should spend his last months with Eleanor, not wasting time on a broken kid who'd probably end up right back in the system anyway. Eleanor had already lost one son. She didn't need to lose another. Better to leave now before they got too attached, before it hurt too much. At 2 in the morning, I crept down the hallway with my backpack slung over one shoulder. The house was quiet except for the familiar sounds I'd learned to recognize. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock in the living room, Frank's soft snoring from the master bedroom. Normal sounds of a normal house where normal people lived normal lives. I wasn't normal. I'd never been normal, and I didn't belong here no matter how much I wanted to. I made it to the front door and turned the handle slowly, carefully, the way Frank had taught me to do everything. Measure twice, cut once, think before you act, do it right or don't do it at all. The night air hit me like a slap. cold and sharp and real. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me without a sound. Started walking down the driveway toward the road, my breath fogging in the streetlight glow. I made it to the end of the driveway, then to the road, then about 50 yards down the street before my legs stopped working. I stood there in the middle of a residential road at 2 in the morning, my backpack weighing 1,000 pounds, and realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave, not because I was afraid of being on my own again. I'd survived worse than Iowa winter nights. Not because I didn't have anywhere to go. I'd figure something out. I always did. I couldn't leave because Frank was dying, and he'd asked me for one thing: to let him be my father, to let him build me into the man he believed I could become, to stay even though goodbye was coming. And here I was, running again, proving every doubt right, confirming that I was exactly what people expected: a flight risk, a kid too damaged to save, someone who'd always choose running over staying, survival over love. I turned around and walked back to the house. Frank was sitting on the porch steps when I got there, wearing his bathrobe and slippers like it was perfectly normal to be outside at 2:30 in the morning. He didn't say anything, just moved over slightly to make room for me to sit beside him. We sat in silence for a long time, our breath visible in the cold air. Finally, he spoke. "You weren't running from us. You were running from the hurt." I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. "I know you know," he continued quietly. "About the cancer. I heard you in the hallway that morning. Heard you go back to your room after. You knew I knew. Hard to hide something like that. You've been watching me different, like you're trying to memorize me, like you think I'm going to disappear. You are going to disappear." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Cole, everybody disappears eventually. That's just how life works. Your mom disappeared into her addiction. Eleanor's parents disappeared into old age and illness. My son Danny disappeared on a wet road at 19 years old. And yeah, I'm going to disappear too, sooner than either of us wants. But here's what I've learned. The people who really matter, they don't disappear completely. They leave pieces of themselves behind, in the things they taught you, in the way they loved you, in the person you become because they existed." He put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm dying, son. That's true, but I'm not gone yet. And when I am gone, I'll still be here. In every nail you hammer straight, in every board you measure twice, in every time you choose to stay when running would be easier." That's what legacy means. It's not about living forever. It's about the part of you that does. Why didn't you tell me when you found out? Because I didn't want you to treat me different. Didn't want you to start measuring our time in months instead of moments. I wanted to be your dad, not your dying dad. I wanted to teach you carpentry, not life lessons about mortality. I wanted us to just be normal for as long as we could. We're not normal. No, we're not. We're a dying old man and a broken kid trying to fix an abandoned farm and each other. That's about as far from normal as you can get. But it's ours, Cole. This weird, hard, beautiful thing we're building together. That's ours. He stood up, offered me his hand. "Come on, let's go inside before Eleanor wakes up and finds us both frozen out here." I took his hand and let him pull me to my feet. We walked into the house together, and I finally unpacked my bag for good. A week later, on March 8th, Frank collapsed. We were at the farm moving lumber for the fence project we'd planned to start that weekend. Frank was carrying one end of a 12-foot board when his legs just gave out. He didn't fall dramatically, didn't cry out. He just sort of folded down onto his knees like someone had cut his strings. I dropped my end of the board and ran to him. Eleanor, who'd been photographing our work from the porch, was there in seconds. "Frank, honey, what's wrong?" "Just dizzy. Give me a minute." Eleanor's voice went steel hard, the way it did when she meant business. "That's it. We're going to the doctor. Right now. It won't change anything. I don't care. We're going." Frank looked up at her, then at me, and something passed between the three of us. A silent acknowledgement that the pretending was over. That we all knew and we all knew each other knew, and it was time to stop dancing around it. "I know," I said quietly. "I know you're sick. I heard you and Eleanor talking. I know you're dying." Frank's face crumpled slightly, then reformed into something like relief. "Oh, son, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to carry that alone." Eleanor knelt beside us, her hand on Frank's back. "We should have told you together. That was wrong of us. You were trying to protect me." "We were trying to protect ourselves," Frank said. "From having to see the hurt in your eyes. From having to admit out loud that our time is limited. Cowardice dressed up as kindness." He took my hand in his, which was shaking slightly. I have pancreatic cancer, stage 3. They found it in November, right before I found you. Original prognosis was 6 to 12 months. I'm 4 months in now, so realistically, I probably have somewhere between 2 and 8 months left. Maybe less if I keep pushing myself. Maybe a little more if I'm lucky. The words hung in the cold March air like smoke. 2 to 8 months. Maybe less. I did the math automatically. That meant June at the earliest, October at the latest. Summer. Maybe autumn. Probably not winter. What do you want to do? I asked. Like bucket list stuff? Frank smiled sadly. I want to finish the farm. I want to see you graduate 8th grade in June. I want one more harvest season if I can manage it. And I want to teach you everything I know, so when I'm gone, you can keep building. Can we do that? Yes, sir. Eleanor was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. And I want family dinners every night, no matter what. I want to hold hands before we eat and be grateful for what we have while we have it. Can we do that too? We can do that. We helped Frank to his feet and drove to the emergency room, where a doctor confirmed what we already knew. The cancer was progressing. Frank's body was starting to shut down in small ways. The dizziness was from low blood pressure. The fatigue was from anemia. The cough was fluid building in his lungs. They wanted to admit him, start aggressive treatment, maybe buy a few more months. Frank refused. He signed a dozen forms and told them he understood the consequences and he was choosing quality over quantity. He was going home to spend his remaining time with his family. That's what he called us. His family. Eleanor and Cole, his family. The doctor tried to argue, but Frank just shook his head. I'm 72 years old and I've lived a good life. I'm not spending my last months in a hospital bed hooked up to machines that'll make me too sick to enjoy the time I have left. I'm going home. End of discussion. So we went home. And the next day we sat around the kitchen table and Frank laid it all out. The timeline. The symptoms to expect. What would happen as things progressed? He spoke matter-of-factly, like he was explaining a construction project, because that was the only way he could get through it without breaking down. I took notes in my journal, wrote down everything he said, memorized it like studying for the most important test of my life, because in a way that's exactly what it was. March bled into April, and Frank kept his promise. He taught me everything he could while he still had the strength. We worked at the farm 3 days a week after school, with Eleanor always present to make sure Frank didn't overdo it. He'd sit in a folding chair and direct while I did the physical labor, explaining every step, every decision, every measurement. He taught me how to build a fence that would last 20 years, how to read soil composition by feeling it between your fingers, how to sharpen a saw blade properly, how to fix a truck engine using nothing but hand tools and patience, how to look at a broken thing and see what it needed to be whole again. But more than that, he taught me how to be a man, not through lectures or life lessons, but through example, by showing up every day even when he felt like hell, by admitting when he needed help, by loving Eleanor with quiet dedication, by treating me like I mattered, like my thoughts and opinions and feelings were valid and important. School became a refuge and a torture. A refuge because for 6 hours a day I could pretend things were normal. A torture because I spent those 6 hours knowing what was waiting at home, what was coming, what I couldn't stop. Claire noticed the change in me immediately. We were in the library during our regular tutoring session when she finally called me out on it. You've been different since March. Distant. Like you're here, but not really here. I'm fine. She put down her pencil and fixed me with a look that said she wasn't buying it. Cole, we're friends, real friends. That means you don't have to lie to me about being fine when you're clearly not. Something in the way she said it, with complete sincerity and no judgment, broke through my defenses. Frank's dying, I said quietly. Cancer. He's got maybe 6 months if we're lucky. Claire's face went pale. Oh God. Cole, I'm so sorry. And then, because she was Claire, and she understood what it meant to watch someone you love slip away, she didn't offer platitudes or false hope. She just reached across the table and held my hand while I tried not to cry in the Cedar Rapids High Library. What do you need? She asked finally. I don't know. To make it not be happening. To have more time, to be able to fix this the way we fix the farm. You can't fix cancer with carpentry. I know, but I wish I could. She squeezed my hand. What can you fix? What's in your control? I thought about it. I can learn everything he wants to teach me. I can make sure he knows I love him. I can be the son he wants me to be before he runs out of time to see it. Then do that. And when it gets too hard, when you need someone to talk to who isn't Frank or Eleanor, I'm here. Okay? Okay? She became my anchor after that. The person who knew what I was going through and didn't try to make it better, just made it bearable. We'd study together and sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. Both of us understanding that sometimes you didn't need words. Sometimes you just needed someone to be present while you fell apart and pulled yourself back together. In May, the axe fell in a different way. A registered letter arrived at the Merrick house addressed to the Patterson estate. Frank opened it at the kitchen table, read it, and his face went gray. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. "The bank is foreclosing on the Patterson farm. Estate's been settled. The kids didn't want it. It's being auctioned June 30th. Minimum bid $60,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $60,000. We didn't have $60,000. Frank and Eleanor were comfortable but not wealthy. Their savings were meant to last through their retirement, not buy farms at auction. Frank stared at the letter like it was a death sentence. All that work, all those months of restoration, and it's going to end up owned by some developer who'll tear it down and build McMansions. "We can't let that happen," I said. Eleanor looked at me sadly. "Cole, honey, we don't have that kind of money." "Then we'll find it." Frank shook his head. "It's not your responsibility, son." "Yes, it is. You taught me that broken things deserve to be fixed. That place was broken, and we fixed it. Together. And I'm not letting someone tear down what we built." The words came out fiercer than I intended, fueled by rage and fear and desperation. I was losing Frank. I couldn't lose the farm, too. I couldn't lose the physical proof that our time together had mattered, that we'd built something that would last. Frank studied me for a long moment. "Then what do you propose?" I thought fast, an idea forming even as I spoke. "We fundraise. We tell people the story, about the farm, about us, about saving a piece of history. We set up one of those online donation things. We have bake sales and car washes and whatever else it takes. We ask the community for help." "That's a lot of money to ask for," Eleanor said gently. "I know, but we've got 6 weeks, and I'm not giving up without a fight." Frank smiled, the first real smile I'd seen since he got the letter. "That's my boy. All right, let's make a plan." Over the next week, we put together a campaign that was equal parts desperation and hope. Eleanor set up a GoFundMe page titled "Save the Patterson Family Farm," with photos she'd taken documenting the restoration. Before and after shots that showed what months of work could accomplish, what love and effort and refusing to give up could create. She wrote the description herself, and when she read it aloud to Frank and me, we both cried. This farm belonged to Henry and Margaret Patterson, who spent 50 years turning Iowa soil into home. When they passed away, their children couldn't keep it, and it fell into disrepair. Then a 14-year-old boy who had nowhere else to go found it and started fixing it. And a 72-year-old carpenter with terminal cancer found that boy and taught him how to build things that last. Together, they've restored this farm to honor the family who loved it first. Now the bank is taking it. We have 6 weeks to raise $60,000 or everything they've built will be demolished. Please help us save this farm. Help us prove that some things are worth fighting for. We shared it everywhere, posted it on community Facebook groups, and sent it to local newspapers. Claire's dad, who turned out to be well-connected in Cedar Rapids, got it featured on the evening news. The story went viral in that small-town way where everyone knows someone who knows someone. I printed flyers and posted them at the grocery store, the library, the community center. Eleanor organized bake sales at her church. Frank, even in his weakening condition, called every veteran he knew and asked them to spread the word. And slowly, impossibly, donations started coming in. $5 from a retired teacher who remembered Margaret Patterson. $10 from a stranger who'd lost their own grandfather to cancer. $25 from a local business owner. $50 from Frank's bowling league. $100 from someone who wrote, "My dad taught me carpentry before he died. This matters." We set up a booth at the farmers market on Saturdays, selling baked goods and lemonade, and telling anyone who'd listen about the farm. I'd bring photos Eleanor had taken, show people the barn roof we'd replaced, the porch we'd rebuilt, the fence we were installing. Show them proof that broken things could be whole again. Claire came to every sale, helping Eleanor manage the money and the crowds. Her presence made it easier somehow, having someone my age who understood why this mattered so much. Who got that the farm wasn't just property. It was proof that I could build something. Proof that Frank and I had existed together. Proof that our weird, hard, beautiful family was real. By the end of May, we had raised $42,000. Close, but not close enough. We had 4 weeks left and $18,000 to go. The math was daunting, but Frank kept saying the same thing every time I mentioned it. We'll figure it out. We always do. June arrived and Frank was noticeably weaker. He couldn't make it to the farm anymore. Didn't have the energy for the drive. Instead, he'd sit on the back porch at home and I'd give him daily reports about progress on the fence, about the garden I'd planted, about the chickens I was planning to get once we owned the place. If we owned the place, school ended with a ceremony I almost didn't attend. 8th grade graduation felt trivial compared to everything else happening. But Eleanor insisted, said Frank wanted to see me walk across that stage, and who was I to deny a dying man one of his last wishes? So I put on the dress shirt and slacks Eleanor bought me and sat through 2 hours of speeches about our bright futures and limitless potential. When they called my name, I walked up to receive my diploma and heard Frank clapping louder than anyone else in the auditorium. I found him in the crowd, sitting in his wheelchair because he couldn't stand that long anymore, with Eleanor beside him and both of them crying. After the ceremony, they asked me to speak as student representative, something I'd found out about just the day before. I hadn't prepared anything, so I just stood at the microphone and said what was in my heart. I want to thank someone who taught me that family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up for you. Frank Merrick showed up for me when I was nobody's kid living in an abandoned barn. He taught me carpentry and patience and how to fix broken things, including myself. He gave me a home and a purpose and a reason to believe I was worth something. He's taught me what it means to be a man, not by talking about it, but by being it, every single day. Even now, when being anything at all takes more courage than I can imagine. Dad, this diploma is for you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being my father. Frank was sobbing by the time I finished. Hell, half the auditorium was sobbing. But I didn't care. I'd said what needed saying while I still had the chance. By June 25th, 5 days before the auction, we'd raised $45,000, 15,000 short. We'd exhausted every avenue we could think of. The GoFundMe donations had slowed to a trickle. The bake sales were yielding diminishing returns. We were out of time and out of options. I sat on my bed that night, staring at the framed photograph of the restored Patterson farm, and felt defeat settling into my bones. We'd fought hard, but it wasn't going to be enough. The farm would be sold. The barn roof Frank and I had replaced would be torn down. The porch we'd rebuilt would be demolished. Everything we'd created together would be erased like it never existed. The knock on my door was quiet, Eleanor coming to tell me it was time for bed probably. But when I opened it, I found both her and Frank standing there, Frank leaning heavily on his walker. "Can we come in?" Of course. They settled on the edge of my bed, Frank moving carefully like everything hurt, which it probably did. Eleanor held an envelope. "Cole, honey, we want you to know we're proud of you. What you've accomplished with this fundraiser, the work you've done at the farm, the man you're becoming, we're so proud. But it's not enough. We're still 15,000 short." Frank took my hand. "Sometimes doing your best is enough, even when it doesn't feel like it. You gave this everything you had. That matters. But we're going to lose the farm." "Probably," Eleanor said gently. "But you won't lose what you built there. Those skills Frank taught you, the confidence you gained, the proof that you can accomplish hard things, that's permanent. Nobody can take that away." I wanted to argue, but I was too tired, too defeated. I just nodded and let them hug me. Frank's embrace weak, but still somehow steady. They left and I fell asleep still in my clothes, emotionally exhausted and out of fight. The next morning, June 28th, 2 days before the auction, Linda Hayes showed up at our door. She looked different than she had at our monthly check-ins. Nervous maybe, or uncertain. Eleanor invited her in, and we all sat in the living room, Frank in his recliner, me on the couch, Eleanor perched on the arm beside Frank's chair. Linda pulled an envelope from her purse. "I've been following your fundraiser, the story of what you're doing at the Patterson farm. It's remarkable, truly remarkable." "Thank you," Frank said. "We gave it our best shot." Linda took a breath. "My husband Tom died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, same as you, Frank. We'd been married 23 years. He was a good man. A builder, actually. Worked construction his whole life. When he died, he left a small life insurance policy, $30,000. I've been holding on to it, not knowing what to do with it. Couldn't bring myself to spend it because that felt like saying goodbye. Couldn't invest it because that felt like profiting from his death. It's just been sitting in my account for 2 years, doing nothing. She slid the envelope across the coffee table. Tom always said money should build things, not just sit. When I read about what you're doing, about this boy learning carpentry from a dying man, about restoring something abandoned back to life, I knew what Tom would want. He'd want to help. So I'm giving you $15,000. It's what's left after I paid for his funeral and his medical bills. It's what he would have wanted. The silence in the room was absolute. Eleanor covered her mouth with both hands. Frank's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't breathe. Linda, Frank said finally, his voice thick. That's too much. We can't accept that. Yes, you can, and you will. Because this matters. Because what you're teaching this boy matters. Because Tom would be furious with me if I let this opportunity pass. Because some things are worth fighting for, and you two fighting for that farm, for each other, that's worth everything. She stood up, ready to leave. The check is in the envelope. $15,000. Don't you dare try to give it back. Use it. Save that farm. Honor the Pattersons and Tom, and everyone who's ever loved a piece of land enough to care for it properly. Eleanor stood and hugged Linda, both women crying. Frank struggled out of his recliner and shook her hand with both of his, unable to speak. I just sat there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Linda, I finally managed. Thank you so much. She smiled at me, tears on her cheeks. Thank you, Cole, for reminding me what love looks like, for showing me that Tom's legacy can live on in ways I never imagined. After she left, we sat in silence for a long time. Then Frank laughed, a sound of pure disbelief and joy. Well, he said, I'll be damned. Eleanor opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a check made out to Cole Brennan for $15,000. We have enough, she whispered. We actually have enough. I started crying then, the kind of crying that comes from relief and gratitude, and the overwhelming realization that sometimes the world gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. 2 days later, on June 30th, we went to the auction. Frank in his wheelchair, too weak to stand for long but refusing to miss this. Eleanor beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Claire, who'd asked permission to come along for moral support. Linda Hayes, who said she wanted to see it through. And about 50 other people from Cedar Rapids who donated to our cause and wanted to witness the culmination of their investment. The auctioneer was a thin man in his 60s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He rattled off the details with bureaucratic efficiency. 40 acres, house in fair condition, barn recently restored, property sold as is. Opening bid $60,000. Do I have $60,000? I raised my hand, holding the bidding paddle Eleanor had gotten for me. My voice cracked when I spoke. $60,000. The auctioneer scanned the crowd. $60,000 from the young man. Do I have 65? Silence. Going once at 60,000. Silence. Going twice at 60,000. I held my breath. Sold to the young man for $60,000. The crowd erupted. People were clapping and crying and cheering like we'd won the Super Bowl instead of a rundown farm in rural Iowa. Frank was sobbing, Eleanor was sobbing, Claire was hugging me, and Linda Hayes was smiling through her tears. I looked at Frank, who reached out his hand. I took it, and he pulled me down to his level in the wheelchair, his voice barely audible over the celebration. You did it, son. You saved it. We did it. Together. We stayed after to sign the paperwork. The farm would be held in trust in my name until I turned 18, with Eleanor as trustee. The deed showed Cole Brennan as owner, a fact that still didn't feel real even as I signed my name to make it official. On July 4th, we had a small celebration at the farm. Just family and close friends, Claire and her dad, Linda Hayes, a few of the neighbors who'd helped with the fundraiser. We set up tables on the newly rebuilt porch, and Eleanor made enough food for an army. Frank looked terrible. The cancer was winning and we all knew it. But he insisted on being there, on seeing the farm one more time, on celebrating what we'd accomplished together. Late in the afternoon, he asked for everyone's attention. He was sitting in his wheelchair on the porch, looking out at the 40 acres we'd saved, and when he spoke, his voice was weak but clear. 32 years ago, I came home from Vietnam, broken in ways I didn't know how to fix. Eleanor put me back together through love and patience and refusing to give up on me. I thought that was the greatest gift I'd ever receive. I was wrong. He gestured to me, this boy right here who I found living in a barn because he had nowhere else to go. He's the greatest gift. He let me be his father when he had every reason not to trust anyone. He worked beside me when he could have run. He fought for this farm when it would have been easier to let it go. He taught me that the time we have matters less than what we do with it. Eleanor's crying, I'm dying, and this boy's learning what it means to be a man. That's legacy. That's what lasts. The legal papers were filed yesterday. This farm belongs to Cole Brennan, held in trust until he's 18. He earned it through sweat and determination and refusing to quit. And I want everyone here to witness this. Cole, this land is yours. You take care of it. You build on it. You turn it into whatever you dream it can be. And you remember that you are capable of extraordinary things. You hear me? I nodded, unable to speak. Come here, son. I walked over and he pulled me into a hug, whispering in my ear. Thank you. Thank you for letting me be your dad. That's all I ever wanted. Dad, I managed. Thank you for choosing me. When he let go, the whole gathering was crying, even Claire's dad, who I'd never seen show much emotion. We stood there on that porch, this weird collection of broken people who'd found each other and built something beautiful. And we celebrated not the farm, but what the farm represented. Hope, second chances, the stubborn refusal to let broken things stay broken. That evening, after everyone had left, Frank asked me to help him walk out to the big oak tree that stood at the edge of the property. The same oak tree Henry and Margaret had planted 50 years ago. We sat beneath it, Frank in a camping chair Eleanor had set up, me on the grass beside him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The farm stretched out before us, restored and whole and ours. For a long time, we just sat in comfortable silence, watching the day end. Finally, Frank spoke. I don't think I have much time left, Cole. Maybe a few weeks, maybe less. Things are progressing faster than the doctors predicted. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. Then we'll make them count. I need you to promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, you keep building. You hear me? You don't stop because it hurts. You don't quit because I'm not here to guide you. You keep working with your hands and your heart, and you build a life worth living. Promise me. I promise. And you take care of Eleanor. She's going to need you. You're her son now, same as you're mine. You take care of her the way she's taking care of us. I will. He reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, son. Prouder than I can put into words. You took a broken farm and made it whole. You took a dying old man and gave him purpose. You took your own brokenness and turned it into strength. That's the mark of a good man, a really good man. You made me into that man. Number one, I just showed you what was already there. You did the rest. We sat there until the stars came out, neither of us wanting the moment to end. Because we both knew moments like this were numbered now, counted, precious. When it got too cold to stay outside, I helped Frank back to the truck where Eleanor was waiting. We drove home in silence, Frank holding Eleanor's hand in the front seat, me in the back watching the farm disappear behind us. I didn't know then that it would be Frank's last good day, that in less than 3 months, he'd be gone and I'd be sitting under that oak tree alone, trying to remember every word he'd said, every lesson he'd taught, every moment we'd shared. But I knew something else. I knew that I'd been given a gift, the gift of a father who chose me, the gift of time, even if it was limited, the gift of learning what love actually means, not the fairy tale kind that lasts forever, but the real kind, the kind that shows up even when it's hard, the kind that builds even when destruction is coming, the kind that stays even when leaving would hurt less. Frank Merrick was teaching me his final lesson, though I didn't fully understand it yet. He was teaching me that love isn't measured in years or decades or lifetimes. It's measured in moments, in choices, in the decision to care even when you know goodbye is inevitable. And as we drove home through the Iowa summer night, the farm secured and the future uncertain, and the present absolutely precious, I understood that I'd been given more in 10 months with Frank than some people get in a lifetime. The clock was ticking. The end was coming, but we still had time, and I was going to make every single second count. July came on hot and humid, the kind of Iowa summer where the air feels thick enough to swim through. Frank spent most of his days in the house now, the heat and his declining strength making even the short walk to the porch a challenge. We'd moved a hospital bed into the living room so he could be part of things, so he wouldn't feel isolated in a bedroom somewhere dying alone while life went on without him. Eleanor transformed into someone I'd never seen before. The soft, patient woman who made cookies and took photographs became steel wrapped in kindness. She managed Frank's medications with military precision, coordinated with hospice nurses, made sure he was comfortable and clean and never alone. She did all of this without complaint, without breaking down in front of him, saving her tears for late nights when she thought no one could hear. But I heard one. I'd lie awake in my room listening to her cry in the bathroom, muffled sobs that she tried to contain but couldn't quite manage. And I understood something about love I'd never grasped before. Love isn't just the happy parts. It's not just holding hands and sharing coffee and making each other laugh. Love is washing someone when they can't wash themselves. It's managing their pain when they hurt too much to speak. It's showing up every single day knowing that each day brings you closer to goodbye. I learned to be a caregiver that summer. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Anna who'd seen more death than anyone should have to, taught me the practicalities. How to help Frank move from bed to wheelchair without hurting him. How to recognize when pain medication was needed before he had to ask. How to change bedding with someone still in it. How to measure dignity in small acts of care. But beyond the mechanics, I learned something deeper. I learned that taking care of someone is an honor, not a burden. That there's strength in gentleness. That real manhood isn't about never needing help. It's about accepting help with grace and giving it without hesitation. Frank's lucid moments became treasures we hoarded like gold. Some days he'd be clear and present, able to hold conversations and share stories. Other days, the pain medication kept him in a fog, his words slurred and his thoughts disconnected. We learned to take what we could get and be grateful for it. On a good day in mid-July, Frank asked me to bring him his old photo albums. We sat together for hours, him in the hospital bed and me in a chair pulled close, going through pictures from his life before I knew him existed. There he was in Vietnam, young and scared and trying to look tough for the camera. There he was meeting Eleanor for the first time, both of them impossibly young and full of hope. There he was holding baby Danny, his face split wide with the kind of joy that only comes from becoming a father. Tell me about Vietnam, I said, because I wanted to know everything and time was running out for questions. Frank was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing the edge of a photograph. I was 19 when I shipped out. Thought I knew everything. Thought I was tough. The war taught me different. Taught me that being tough doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway. He coughed, a wet rattling sound that made Eleanor look over from where she was organizing medications. I handed him water and waited while he caught his breath. I did things over there I'm not proud of. Saw things I'll never unsee. Came home broken in ways that took years to heal. John Patterson, Henry's older brother, he saved my life. Not in combat, but after. He taught me carpentry, gave me purpose, showed me that my hands could build instead of destroy, that I could create something instead of just surviving. He looked at me then, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. That's what I'm doing with you, Cole. What John did for me. I'm showing you that your hands can build, that you can create. That broken doesn't mean useless. You understand? I understand. Good. Because when I'm gone, I need you to remember this. You're not broken. You're just a kid who had a hard start. That's all. And hard starts don't determine endings. You get to write the rest of your story. You get to choose who you become. I will, Dad, I promise. That night I wrote in my journal trying to capture his words exactly because I knew I'd need them later. Need to remember that someone believed in me enough to say these things out loud. Need proof that I hadn't imagined this whole thing, that a dying man really had chosen to spend his last months teaching me how to live. August brought a new kind of normal. Frank was bedridden now, too weak to transfer to the wheelchair for more than brief periods. We brought the world to him instead. Eleanor would read him the newspaper each morning over breakfast. I'd tell him about my trips to the farm, describing every detail of the work I was doing to maintain what we built together. Claire would visit and read to him from books he loved, old westerns and war memoirs and farming magazines. The community started showing up in ways that made my throat tight. Claire's dad would stop by to check on Frank, medical bag in hand, even though there wasn't much medicine could do anymore. Just wanted to make sure he was comfortable, he'd say. Linda Hayes brought casseroles twice a week, enough food to feed us for days so Eleanor wouldn't have to cook. Neighbors I barely knew would appear with offers to mow the lawn, or fix a leaking faucet, or just sit with Frank for an hour so Eleanor could take a shower. This is what community means, Eleanor explained one night when I commented on it. People showing up for each other, taking care of our own. Frank's been doing it for folks in this town for 40 years. Now they're returning the favor. On August 1st, Frank taught me about crop rotation from his hospital bed. He couldn't go to the farm anymore, couldn't walk the fields or feel the soil between his fingers. But he could draw diagrams on a legal pad, his hands shaking but still capable, explaining how to keep land healthy year after year. You can't plant the same crop in the same spot forever, he said, his voice weak but patient. The soil gets tired. You've got to rotate. Corn this year, soybeans next year. Maybe let it rest the third year. Cover crops in between. You're not just growing food, you're feeding the earth that feeds you. I took notes like my life depended on it. Because in a way it did. The farm was mine now. My responsibility, my future. And Frank was giving me the knowledge I'd need to keep it thriving after he was gone. August 5th, he explained water table management. Drew me maps of the property showing where water collected, where drainage needed improvement, where a pond could be dug to collect runoff for irrigation. His mind was still sharp, even as his body failed, and I was grateful for every piece of wisdom he could share. August 12th, he told me stories about building his first house with Eleanor. They'd done most of the work themselves, young and broke and full of dreams. She measured everything 3 times, he said with a smile. Drove me crazy at first. Then I realized she was right. Measure 3 times, cut once, never waste materials. I loved her for that, for being the brake when I wanted to rush, for making me slow down and do things right. Eleanor was sitting nearby when he said it, and she reached over to take his hand. Still do, she said quietly. Still measure 3 times. And I still love you for it. The intimacy of that moment, the quiet declaration of love between 2 people who'd spent 50 years together, made me look away. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because it was sacred. Because I was witnessing something profound and private and absolutely beautiful. That's what I want, I thought. Someday when I'm old and dying, I want someone who'll sit beside me and remember that I measured 3 times. I want someone who chose me and kept choosing me for 50 years. I want what they have. August 20th was a hard day. Frank's pain was worse than usual, the medication barely touching it. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally calling out for people who weren't there. His mother dead 30 years. His son Danny, gone 15. Friends from Vietnam who'd never made it home. Anna, the hospice nurse, told us this was normal. That as the end approached, the veil between this world and whatever came next grew thin. That he was seeing people we couldn't see, going places we couldn't follow. Not yet anyway. That evening, during a lucid moment, Frank grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Cole, come here. Closer. I leaned in, my ear near his mouth, so I could hear his whispered words. You are enough, just as you are. You don't have to earn love by being perfect. You don't have to earn your place by working yourself to death. You belong because you exist. You hear me? I hear you, Dad. Good. Don't forget it, especially when I'm gone. You are enough. I promised him I'd remember, even though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. But that was okay. He believed it enough for both of us. Late August brought the first real signs that the end was close. Frank slept more than he was awake. When he did wake, he was often confused about where he was or what year it was. The hospice nurse increased his morphine, prioritizing comfort over consciousness. There was nothing left to do but keep him clean and comfortable and loved. Eleanor barely left his side. She'd sleep in the recliner next to his bed, waking at every sound to check on him. I'd find her in the middle of the night, holding his hand and singing softly. Old hymns from her childhood, love songs from their early years together. Lullabies she used to sing to Danny. One night I asked her how she did it, how she stayed so strong when everything was falling apart. She looked at me with eyes that had cried enough tears to fill oceans. I'm not strong, honey. I'm terrified. But Frank needs me to be present, not absent. He needs me here, not drowning in what's coming. So I give him what I can while I can, and I save the falling apart for later. You'll still have me, I said. When he's gone, you'll still have me. She pulled me into a hug, this woman who'd become my mother in every way that mattered. I know, baby, I know. And that's what's going to get me through it. The community rallied one last time in late August. Word had spread that Frank didn't have long, and people wanted to say goodbye. They organized what they called a harvest day, coming to the farm to do the work I couldn't manage alone. 40 people showed up on a Saturday morning with tools and trucks and determination. They harvested the corn I'd planted in the spring, collected the vegetables from the garden, repaired a section of fence that had come loose, painted the barn door. All of it done while I was home with Frank, unable to be in two places at once, but needing to be at both. Claire's dad organized the whole thing. Figured you needed to be with Frank, he told me later. But the farm still needs tending. That's what neighbors do. They tend what needs tending. That evening, people brought everything they'd harvested to the house. Corn and tomatoes and green beans and more. Enough to fill the freezer and the pantry, enough to feed Eleanor and me for months. Frank was awake when they came, lucid enough to understand what they'd done. Thank you, he whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. Thank you for taking care of my boy and his farm. We're taking care of our own, someone said. That's all, just taking care of our own. After everyone left, I told Frank about every detail of what they'd done. Described the straight rows of harvested corn, the bushels of produce, the freshly painted barn door. He smiled, satisfied. That's legacy, he said quietly. Not what you build with your hands, what you build with your heart. Those people, they're your legacy. They'll be there for you when I'm not. Remember that. September arrived and Frank's breathing changed. It became labored, rattling, the sound of lungs filling with fluid they couldn't expel. Anna explained that this was the beginning of the end. Days, maybe a week, not longer. Eleanor called Frank's remaining family. His sister in Oregon, who flew in immediately, a cousin from Minnesota, a handful of friends from his military days. They came to say goodbye, sitting with him in shifts, sharing memories and tears and the unspoken acknowledgement that this was farewell. On September 10th, Frank had a surprisingly good day, clear-minded and alert for longer than he'd been in weeks. Eleanor seized the opportunity for one last conversation, just the two of them. She asked me to give them privacy, and I retreated to my room but couldn't help overhearing. I'm sorry I'm leaving you, Frank said, his voice carrying through the quiet house. You stop that right now. You have nothing to apologize for. 50 years wasn't enough. It never would have been enough. But it was beautiful, Frank. Every minute of it was beautiful. Take care of our boy. You know I will. He's our son. In every way that matters, he's our son. I know. That's the best thing I ever did. Choosing to be his father. Choosing to love him even though I knew I'd have to leave. You taught him well. You taught him how to be a good man. I hope so. God, I hope so. I couldn't listen anymore. I went outside and sat on the back steps, looking up at stars I could barely see through the tears. Everything hurt. My chest, my throat, my heart, everything. Claire found me there an hour later. She'd been coming by most evenings just to sit with me, to be present without needing words. She sat down beside me and took my hand. It's almost time, isn't it? She asked. Yeah, days now, Anna says, maybe a week. How are you holding up? I don't know. I don't know how to do this, Claire. I don't know how to lose him. You just do. One breath at a time, one moment at a time. And when it gets too hard, you let people help you. You let me help you. I don't want to lose him. I know, but you're going to. And it's going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt. But you'll survive it. And he'll still be with you in all the ways that matter. She was right, of course. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less. September 15th brought Frank's last real conversation with me. He was awake and left it on there for maybe 20 minutes, a gift we both knew wouldn't come again. Eleanor gave us privacy, stepping into the kitchen to make tea she didn't drink. Frank gestured for me to come close. His hand was cold when I took it, his grip weak. Cole, he whispered, my tools, in the workshop. They're yours. Use them well. I will, Dad. And the farm. Don't let it break you. It's a gift, not a burden, okay? Okay. Proud of you. I love you, Dad. Love you too, son. Those were the last coherent words he spoke to me. After that, he slipped into unconsciousness more than consciousness, his moments of awareness becoming shorter and more confused. But I held on to those final words like a lifeline. Proud of you. Love you too, son. For 5 days, we kept vigil. Eleanor and I took turns sitting with him, reading aloud even though we weren't sure he could hear. I read from his favorite Western novels, stories of tough men doing hard things in unforgiving landscapes. Stories Frank had always loved because they reminded him of the men he'd known in Vietnam, the men who'd survived through grit and loyalty and stubborn refusal to quit. Eleanor sang to him old hymns, love songs, even silly ditties from when Danny was little. Her voice would crack, but she'd keep going, filling the room with sound so Frank wouldn't feel alone in whatever space he occupied. On September 20th, Frank opened his eyes for the last time. He looked at Eleanor first, his gaze finding her with what seemed like great effort. Then he looked at me. He couldn't speak, but he didn't need to. Everything he wanted to say was in his eyes: love, pride, gratitude. Goodbye. Eleanor leaned over and kissed his forehead. Rest now, my love. We'll be okay. You can rest. His eyes closed and didn't open again. For 4 days, he lingered in that twilight space between life and death. His breathing grew more labored, more irregular. Periods of rapid breaths followed by long pauses where we'd hold our own breath, wondering if each pause was the last. The hospice nurse called it Cheney-Stokes breathing, a pattern common at the very end. She assured us he wasn't suffering, that he was beyond pain now, beyond awareness, just a body going through its final rhythms. We moved into the living room full time. Eleanor in the recliner, me on the couch, both of us refusing to be anywhere else. Claire brought food we barely ate. Linda Hayes sat with us for hours, her presence a comfort because she'd walked this road before. Neighbors stopped by to pay respects, speaking in hushed voices to this man who'd been part of their community for 40 years. September 24th dawned clear and cool, the first real hint that fall was coming. Frank's breathing had changed again overnight, becoming shallow and irregular. Anna arrived early and quietly told us it would be today. Soon, probably. The signs were all there. Eleanor called Frank's sister, who came immediately. The few friends still in town gathered in the kitchen, giving us space but staying close in case we needed them. Claire and her dad arrived and stationed themselves on the back porch, close enough to respond if called, but far enough away to give us privacy. At 6 in the evening, Eleanor asked them all to leave. Just for an hour, just so it could be the three of us. Our family. The way it had been for these 10 short months that had somehow contained a lifetime. They left, and Eleanor and I took our positions on either side of Frank's bed. Eleanor held his right hand, I held his left, and we waited. She sang to him one last time. Amazing Grace, his favorite hymn. Her voice was steady and sure. 40 years of loving him, giving her the strength to send him off right. Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Frank's breathing slowed. The pauses between breaths grew longer. Eleanor kept singing, her hand stroking his hair the way you might comfort a child. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun. At 7:42, Frank took one last shallow breath, then another, so faint I almost missed it. Then nothing. We waited, counted to 30, to 60, to 90, but he was gone. The man who'd found me in a barn and chosen to be my father had taken his last breath while his wife sang him to heaven. Eleanor kissed his forehead one last time. Rest now, my love. You earned it. I couldn't speak, could only sit there holding his cold hand, trying to process that this body in the bed was no longer Frank. Frank was gone. The force of personality, the quiet strength, the patient teaching, all of it gone. What remained was just a shell, empty and still. Goodbye, Dad, I finally whispered. Thank you for everything. We sat with him for another hour before Eleanor called the hospice nurse. Even then, we were reluctant to let anyone else in, to share this private grief with the world. But eventually we had to. Eventually there were phone calls to make and arrangements to finalize, and 100 practical details that couldn't wait just because our hearts were breaking. Anna came first, confirmed what we already knew, made the official notation of time of death. Then the funeral home, quiet men in dark suits who treated Frank's body with respect as they transferred him to a gurney. Eleanor held my hand through all of it, both of us crying silently as they wheeled Frank out of our house for the last time. After they left, the house felt impossibly empty. The hospital bed was still there, sheets rumpled from his final hours. His wheelchair sat in the corner. His reading glasses were on the side table. Everything exactly as it had been, except the one thing that mattered was gone. Claire found us sitting at the kitchen table sometime after midnight, both of us staring at nothing, too empty to cry anymore. She didn't ask permission, just came in and sat with us. Her dad followed with coffee and sandwiches we'd eventually eat because we had to. The next 4 days passed in a blur of planning and phone calls and people stopping by with condolences and casseroles. The funeral was set for September 28th, 4 days after his death. Time enough to arrange things properly, to let word spread, to prepare ourselves for the finality of burial. We chose the Cedar Rapids National Cemetery, where Frank would be buried with full military honors. Eleanor picked out his favorite suit, the one he'd worn to our 8th grade graduation. I wrote a eulogy I wasn't sure I could deliver, but knew I had to try. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and cool, appropriate weather for saying goodbye. Eleanor dressed in black and pearls, elegant in her grief. I wore the suit she'd bought me for graduation, the one Frank had been so proud to see me in. The cemetery was crowded. Over 200 people came to pay their respects. Veterans from Frank's unit in Vietnam, some of them traveling from other states. People he'd helped over the years, carpenters and neighbors and folks who remembered kindnesses from decades past. The whole fundraising team who'd helped save the farm. Teachers from my school. Linda Hayes and her family. Claire and her dad. The funeral director gave us a moment alone with the casket before the service. Eleanor leaned over and kissed Frank's forehead one last time, her hand resting on his chest. Goodbye, my love. Thank you for 50 beautiful years. Wait for me, okay? I'll see you again. I couldn't touch him. Couldn't make myself reach out and feel cold skin where warm life used to be. So I just stood there and whispered, I'll make you proud, Dad. I promise I'll make you proud. The service was military precise. The honor guard, honor guard, 7 veterans in crisp uniforms performed their duties with solemn respect. The folding of the flag took my breath away, each crease deliberate and meaningful. The playing of taps made everyone cry. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium on shaking legs and looked out at the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and spoke from my heart. Frank Merrick taught me what it means to be a man, not by telling me, but by showing me. He showed me that strength is showing up even when you're afraid, that love is staying even when leaving would be easier, that legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you leave behind. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. Frank left behind a son, me. I'm not his biological child. He found me living in a barn when I was 14 years old with nowhere to go and nothing to my name. He could have called the police. He could have walked away, but he didn't. He chose to be my father. He chose to love me even though he knew he was dying. He chose to spend his last months teaching me how to live. Tears were streaming down my face, but I kept going. He taught me carpentry and patience and how to fix broken things, including myself. He taught me that work matters, that doing things right matters, that showing up for people matters. He taught me that you measure a life not in years but in impact, not in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. I looked at Eleanor, who was crying into her handkerchief. Dad, wherever you are, I hope you're proud. I'm going to spend every day of my life honoring what you taught me. I'm going to be the man you believed I could be. I'm going to help others the way you helped me. I'm going to keep building. I promise you, I'll keep building. I couldn't say any more. Just stepped away from the podium and let someone else take over. Eleanor pulled me close and we cried together while the minister finished the service. The honor guard fired the 21-gun salute, the shots echoing across the cemetery. They presented the folded flag to Eleanor, who clutched it to her chest like it was Frank himself. And then it was over. The man who'd saved my life was in the ground, and I was standing in a cemetery trying to figure out how to keep breathing when it felt like someone had carved out my chest. The reception was at the house. Dozens of people crowded into our living room and kitchen and yard, sharing memories and stories and casseroles. I heard 100 versions of Frank I'd never known. Frank who'd helped rebuild a neighbor's porch after a storm. Frank who'd taught carpentry classes at the community center for free. Frank who'd visited other veterans in the hospital when they were dying, making sure they didn't die alone. He was a good man, people kept saying. The best man I knew. I wanted to scream at them. I know he was good. That's why this hurts so much. But I didn't scream. I just nodded and accepted condolences and waited for everyone to leave so I could fall apart in private. October arrived and the world had the audacity to keep turning. The sun came up. The leaves changed colors. Life continued as if Frank Merrick hadn't just exited it. I went through the motions because I had to. Got up, got dressed, ate food I couldn't taste. But inside, I was hollow. Eleanor worried about me. I could see it in the way she watched me, the way she'd find excuses to check on me. But she was drowning in her own grief. 50 years of shared life suddenly cut in half, and I didn't want to burden her with mine. So I worked. Threw myself into maintaining the farm with obsessive focus, fixed things that didn't need fixing, organized tools that were already organized, kept myself busy from sunrise to sunset so I wouldn't have time to feel. Claire tried to reach me, but I couldn't let her in. Couldn't let anyone in. If I started talking about it, about the gaping wound where Frank used to be, I'd never stop. So I kept it locked down, buried deep, festering. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was in the barn trying to fix a workbench that was perfectly fine when something inside me just broke. The wrench slipped, I skinned my knuckles, and suddenly I was screaming, throwing tools, kicking over sawhorses, destroying the carefully organized workspace Frank had taught me to maintain. Eleanor found me on the floor, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. She didn't say anything, just sat down beside me and pulled me into her lap like I was 5 years old instead of 15. Let me cry until I had nothing left. Let it out, baby, she whispered. Let it all out. I miss him so much. I miss him so much and it hurts, and I don't know how to make it stop. I know, honey, I know. It won't stop, not for a long time, maybe never completely, but it will get bearable. I promise it will get bearable. How? How do you survive this? One breath at a time, one moment at a time. And by remembering that the love doesn't die with them, the love stays. Frank's love for you, your love for him, that's permanent. Death can't touch that. She held me while I cried myself out. This woman who was grieving just as hard, but still had the strength to hold me together. When I finally calmed down, she helped me stand, and we walked back to the house together. That night, she sat me down at the kitchen table and made hot chocolate the way she used to when I first arrived. We sat in silence for a while, then she spoke. Grief isn't something you get over, Cole. It's something you carry, but you can choose how you carry it. As a burden that crushes you, or as a reminder of love. Frank loved you. You loved him. That was real. That mattered. And nothing, not even death, can take that away. I started seeing a therapist the next week. Eleanor insisted, said she was seeing one too, that there was no shame in needing help to carry grief this heavy. The therapist, a kind man named Dr. Martinez, taught me that mourning was a process, not an event, that I'd cycle through anger and sadness and acceptance over and over, maybe for years. But you'll survive it, he said. Humans are built to survive loss. It's our superpower and our curse. I started journaling again, writing letters to Frank that he'd never read, but I needed to write, telling him about my days, about the farm, about how much I missed him. It helped, having a place to put all the words I couldn't say out loud. October 31st arrived, Halloween. Eleanor and I had talked about skipping the whole thing, not feeling festive enough to hand out candy. But at the last minute, she pulled out decorations, and we remembered what Frank had always done. Full-size candy bars, being the most popular house on the block. Let's do it for him, Eleanor said. He loves seeing the kids excited. So we carved pumpkins and hung fake spiderwebs and filled bowls with full-size Snickers bars. And when the doorbell started ringing just after sunset, we answered with smiles that felt strange on our faces but got easier with each group of kids. The last trick-or-treater was a little boy, maybe 6 years old, dressed as a cowboy with a hat too big for his head. His mother waited at the end of the driveway while he walked up alone, practicing his bravery. Trick or treat. I dropped a candy bar in his bucket, and he looked up at me with wide eyes. Are you Cole, the boy who saved the farm? I blinked, surprised. Yeah, that's me. My daddy says you're a hero, says you and the old man fixed up the Patterson place. I felt my throat tighten. We did. My dad and me. We fixed it up together. Where's your dad? He died a few weeks ago. The little boy's face scrunched up in sympathy. I'm sorry. That's sad. Yeah, it is. But you're still fixing things, right? That's what my daddy says. You're still fixing things even though your dad's gone. I looked at Eleanor, who was crying silently in the doorway. Then I looked back at this little boy who didn't know he was teaching me something important. Yeah, I said, I'm still fixing things because that's what he taught me to do. The boy nodded seriously like this made perfect sense. Good. My daddy says the world needs people who fix things. He waved and ran back to his mother, his candy bucket bouncing against his leg. I watched him go, then turned to Eleanor. She smiled through her tears. Frank would have loved that. He would have. We brought the leftover candy inside and sat on the couch together. The first Halloween without Frank stretching ahead of us. But somehow that little boy's words had cracked something open. Frank was gone, but what he'd taught me remained. The skills, the values, the belief that I was capable of fixing broken things. I was still fixing things. I would always be fixing things, because that's what Frank Merrick had taught me to do. And maybe that was enough. Maybe keeping building, keeping fixing, keeping showing up even when it hurt like hell. Maybe that was how you honored someone. Not by stopping when they died, but by continuing what they'd started. The farm was still there. The tools were still there. The community was still there. And I was still there, 15 years old and grieving and absolutely determined to keep building the life Frank had believed I deserved. I pulled out my journal and wrote one more letter. Dad, I met a kid tonight who asked if I was still fixing things. I told him yes, because you taught me that's what we do. We fix things. We build things. We keep showing up even when everything hurts. I miss you every day. I'll miss you every day for the rest of my life. But I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to be the man you taught me to be. I'm going to keep building. I promise. I love you. Your son, Cole. I closed the journal and looked at Eleanor. We're going to be okay, aren't we? She took my hand. We are. It won't be easy. It won't be quick. But we're going to be okay. Because Frank taught us how. And she was right. We didn't know it then, but we were going to be okay. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Because that's what Frank had taught us. How to survive loss. How to carry grief. How to keep building even when everything was falling apart. The harvest was over. Winter was coming, but spring would follow the way it always did, and we'd be there to see it. Together, time is a strange thing when you're grieving. Some days feel like years, each hour dragging through mud. Other days vanish like smoke. Whole weeks gone before you realize they passed it all. November became December, became January, and suddenly it was spring again, and I was 16 years old, and Frank had been gone 6 months, and the world kept turning like it had any right to. I threw myself into the farm that winter and spring. It was the only thing that made sense, the only language I still spoke fluently. I'd wake before sunrise and work until my hands bled, fixing things that didn't need fixing, building projects Frank and I had only talked about. A new chicken coop rose where the old one had collapsed. The fence got extended another 20 yards. I planted fruit trees along the southern border, varieties Frank had mentioned wanting someday. Eleanor worried. I could see it in the ways she'd watch me from the kitchen window, in the careful questions she'd ask at dinner about whether I was overdoing it. But she understood too. She had her own grief work, her own ways of keeping Frank alive. She organized all his photographs into albums, wrote captions in her careful handwriting. She volunteered at the library again, filling her days with purpose the way I filled mine with labor. We were both building shrines to a dead man, but at least we were building. School was something I endured rather than engaged with. I showed up, did the work, maintained my grades because Frank would have expected it. But I felt disconnected from the other students, separated by a gulf of experience they couldn't cross. They worried about prom dates and college applications. I worried about whether Eleanor was eating enough, whether the farm could sustain itself, whether the grief would ever stop feeling like drowning. Claire was my anchor through all of it. She'd come to the farm most weekends, helping with whatever needed doing. We didn't talk much about Frank or feelings or the future. We just worked side by side, the comfortable silence of two people who understood that sometimes you needed to move your body so your mind could rest. One Saturday in April, we were painting the chicken coop when she finally broke our unspoken rule about not pushing. You know, you can't work yourself to death to make up for his dying, right? I kept painting, long steady strokes like Frank had taught me. I'm not trying to make up for anything. I'm just maintaining what we built. Cole, you're 16. You should be hanging out with friends, playing video games, doing stupid teenager stuff, not working 12-hour days on a farm. This is what I want to be doing. Is it? Or is it just easier than dealing with the fact that he's gone? I put down my paintbrush and looked at her. Maybe both. Maybe it's what I want because it's easier. What's wrong with that? Nothing. As long as you're not running from something. I'm not running. I'm staying. That's what Frank taught me. You stay, you show up, you do the work. Even when the work is just avoiding how you feel. Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I picked up the brush again, but my hands were shaking. I miss him, Claire. Every single day I miss him. And working here, building things he'd be proud of, it's the only time I feel close to him. Is that running? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. No, but it's also not living. Frank didn't save you so you could spend your life mourning him. He saved you so you could have a life, a real one, with friends and mistakes and experiences that have nothing to do with him. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because she was right. I'd been so focused on honoring Frank's memory that I'd forgotten to actually live the life he'd given me the tools to build. That conversation stuck with me through the rest of spring. I started saying yes to things, went to a movie with some kids from school, joined Claire and her dad for dinner one night. Small steps toward being 16 instead of being a miniature widower. But the farm was still my center, still the place that made sense when nothing else did. In May, Eleanor sat me down at the kitchen table with a serious expression that made my stomach drop. Had her cancer come back? Was something wrong with the house? Had I done something? Cole, honey, I've been thinking a lot about what we're doing with the farm, what you're doing. If this is about me working too much, Claire already lectured me. She smiled. It's not that. Well, not exactly. I've been watching you pour yourself into that place, and I see how much it means to you, how much healing you're doing there. And it made me think about something Frank said once back before you came into our lives. She pulled out a letter yellowed with age, written in Frank's blocky handwriting. I found this in his papers after he died. It's from about 10 years ago, addressed to me but never sent. I think he wrote it when he was feeling mortal, wanting to get his thoughts down. She slid it across to me. Read it. The letter was dated 2014, a year before Frank and I met. The handwriting was steadier than it had been at the end, but unmistakably his. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're trying to figure out what comes next. Here's what I want you to know. The farm we bought when Danny was little, the one we sold after he died because we couldn't stand the memories, that was a mistake. Not buying it, but selling it. We should have turned our pain into purpose. Should have made that place mean something beyond our grief. I don't want you to make the same mistake with whatever I leave behind. If there's property, if there's resources, if there's anything of value, use it. Not for yourself, though Lord knows you deserve everything. Use it to help other people. Other boys like Danny who needed guidance. Other kids who fall through cracks. Make my death mean something. Make it build something. That's all I ask. That's my only request. Build something that lasts, love. Frank. I read it 3 times before I could speak. He wanted this. Wanted something like this. Eleanor nodded. He did. He just didn't know what form it would take. But I think I do. And I think you do too, if you're honest with yourself. I looked at her, this woman who'd become my mother in every way that mattered. What are you thinking? She leaned forward, eyes bright with the first real excitement I'd seen since Frank died. I'm thinking we turn the farmhouse into a transitional home for kids aging out of foster care. Kids like you were who need a bridge between the system and independence. We've got the space, we've got the farm for them to learn skills on, and we've got you. Someone who understands what they're going through because you lived it. The idea hit me like a physical force. It was perfect. It was exactly what Frank would have wanted. It was purpose beyond grief. But I'm only 16. I don't know how to run a program like that. No, but I do. I spent 30 years as a librarian working with at-risk youth, and Linda Hayes has already told me if we ever wanted to do something like this, she'd help navigate the system. We'd need funding, we'd need licensing, we'd need a lot of things. But Cole, we could do this. We could make Frank's death mean something. I felt tears coming, but for once they weren't just grief. They were hope. When would we start? Eleanor smiled. How about today? Let's start planning today. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of paperwork and fundraising and renovation. We formed a nonprofit called Merrick House, named for the man whose vision it honored. Linda Hayes helped us navigate the Department of Human Services requirements for operating a transitional living program. We needed background checks, facility inspections, insurance, emergency protocols, 100 bureaucratic hurdles that felt designed to make us quit. We didn't quit. The fundraising campaign was smaller than the one that had saved the farm, but no less heartfelt. We needed $25,000 to renovate the farmhouse properly. 3 bedrooms for residents, a communal living space, updated kitchen, proper bathrooms. We needed furniture and supplies and a 6-month operating budget to get started. The community showed up again. The same people who'd helped save the farm donated to build something new on it. Claire organized bake sales. Eleanor's church held a special collection. I gave talks at service organizations about what the program would mean, why it mattered, what Frank would have wanted. By September, on what would have been Frank's 73rd birthday, we'd raised $32,000. More than enough to begin. The renovations took 2 months. I did as much of the work as I could, Eleanor supervising and making sure I didn't cut corners. Every nail I hammered was a prayer. Every board I measured was a promise. We were building something that would last. In early November, exactly 2 years after Frank had found me in that barn, Merrick House opened its doors to its first resident. His name was Marcus Thompson, and he was 18 years old and had aged out of the foster system 3 months earlier. He'd been sleeping in his car, a beat-up Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a back seat full of his possessions. He'd been working double shifts at a fast food place, trying to save enough for a deposit on an apartment he couldn't afford on $9 an hour. Linda Hayes had connected him with our program, and when she called to tell me about him, I heard something familiar in her description. Scared, angry, trying to survive on pride and stubbornness alone. The day he arrived, I watched him from the kitchen window as he sat in his car for 20 minutes, just staring at the farmhouse like he was trying to decide whether to trust what he was seeing. I recognized that hesitation. I'd felt it myself 2 years ago when Frank had offered me something that seemed too good to be real. Finally, he got out, pulled a garbage bag from his back seat, the white plastic stretched thin over sharp corners of everything he owned, walked toward the house with shoulders hunched, ready for disappointment. I met him on the porch, the same porch Frank and I had rebuilt together. The boards were solid under my feet, every nail placed with intention. I could almost feel Frank standing beside me, watching this moment, approving. "Marcus, I'm Cole, welcome home." He looked around skeptically, taking in the restored farmhouse, the barn with its new roof, the chicken coop I'd built last spring. "This doesn't look like a group home." "It's not. It's a farm. And if you're willing to work, willing to learn, willing to show up for yourself, it can be your home for up to a year. We'll teach you skills, help you save money, support you while you figure out what comes next. No judgment, no catch, just a chance." His eyes narrowed. "What's the real catch?" "There's always a catch. The catch is you have to believe you're worth saving. That's the hardest part. But I promise you, that's the only catch." He studied me for a long moment. "How old are you?" 17. "And you run this place?" "Me and Eleanor. She's inside making dinner." "You like pot roast?" "I don't know. Never had it." "Then you're in for a treat. Come on, I'll show you your room." I led him upstairs to the bedroom Eleanor and I had prepared. It wasn't fancy, just a bed with clean sheets, a dresser, a desk with a lamp. But I'd built the desk myself over the summer, following techniques Frank had taught me. Measure twice, cut once, make it sturdy enough to last. Marcus set his garbage bag down carefully, like he was afraid it might break even though it was already held together with duct tape. "This is mine, just yours. Bathroom's down the hall. Dinner's in an hour. You can settle in, or if you want, I can show you around the farm." He chose the farm tour, probably because staying alone in the room would have meant confronting how much this meant to him. We walked the property together, me pointing out the barn, the workshop, the garden plot that was sleeping for winter but would wake up green in spring. "You built all this?" he asked when I explained the restoration work. "Me and Frank, the man who owned this place before. Well, his wife, Eleanor, still owns it, but Frank and I fixed most of it. He taught me everything: how to frame a wall, replace a roof, read soil composition, how to be patient with myself when I messed up." "Where is he now?" Marcus's face shifted, something that might have been understanding crossing it. "My mom died when I was 12. Cancer. That's when I went into the system." "I'm sorry." "Yeah, me too." We stood there for a moment, 2 kids who knew what it meant to lose people, and somehow that shared understanding said more than 1,000 words could have. "Why would you do this?" he finally asked. "Why would you help me?" "Because someone did it for me. Frank found me living in that barn when I was 14, broke and scared and convinced I'd never amount to anything. He could have called the cops, should have probably, but he didn't. He took me home, taught me carpentry, showed me I was worth more than the system had told me, and now it's my turn to pass it on. That's how this works. Someone helps you, you help someone else. Chain of kindness, Frank called it. Long as someone keeps forging links, it never breaks. Marcus was quiet, processing. Then he said something I'll never forget. I don't know if I believe in kindness, but I'm willing to test the theory. Fair enough. Come on. Eleanor's pot roast waits for no man. Marcus stayed. The first week was rocky. He woke at 5 a.m. every morning, habit from sleeping in his car when he had to move before business owners arrived and called the cops. I'd find him sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise like he was afraid it might not come back if he looked away. On the third day, I taught him how to use a circular saw. We were cutting boards for a new shelf in the barn, and his hands shook when he gripped the tool. It's loud, I warned him, and it'll kick if you're not ready for it. But it's just a tool. It can't hurt you if you respect it. He made the first cut crooked, swore under his breath, looked at me like he expected punishment. That's why we buy extra lumber, I said, channeling Frank's patient voice. Try again. This time, let the saw do the work. Don't force it. The second cut was better. The third was almost perfect. That night at dinner, Eleanor asked him about his day. Learned to use a saw. Didn't lose any fingers. Eleanor smiled. That's progress. Tomorrow, Cole will teach you to use the table saw. That one actually can take fingers if you're not careful. Marcus looked alarmed. Maybe I'll stick with hand tools. We all laughed, and I saw something in his face soften. He was starting to believe this might be real. By the end of the first month, Marcus had built a small bookshelf for his room, repaired a section of fence, and learned to make Eleanor's biscuits from scratch. He'd also enrolled in community college classes in automotive technology, something he'd wanted to study but never thought he could afford. I sat in on the enrollment meeting with him and his advisor. Watched him fill out forms with hands that no longer shook quite as much. Watched him select classes about engines and transmissions and electrical systems. Watched him become someone who believed in his own future. On the drive back, he said, I never thought I'd go to college. Why not? Because people like me don't go to college. We're statistics, dropout rates and incarceration rates and all those numbers they throw around about foster kids. You're not a statistic, you're Marcus. And Marcus is going to be a mechanic. Good one too if you put in the work. He was quiet for a minute. Then, thanks, man, for believing in me when I couldn't. That's what Frank did for me. I'm just keeping the chain going. We added our second resident in mid-December. Her name was Jasmine Rodriguez, 19 years old, and she'd been couch surfing for 6 months since aging out. She'd cycled through 5 different temporary living situations, wearing out welcome after welcome because she didn't know how to exist in someone else's space without making herself invisible. Linda Hayes brought her out on a gray December afternoon. Jasmine was small, maybe 5'2", with dark eyes that watched everything and said nothing. She carried a backpack, and that was it. Everything she owned fit in one bag. Eleanor took point with her, woman to woman, showed her the bedroom next to Marcus's, explained the house rules. Be respectful, contribute to chores, no drugs or alcohol, attend weekly group meetings. Simple things, but Jasmine listened like Eleanor was speaking a foreign language. Why are you helping me? She asked. The same question Marcus had asked, the same question I'd asked Frank. Eleanor's answer was different than mine had been, because I know what it's like to lose someone and not know how to live with the empty space they left behind. You've lost a lot, haven't you? Parents, stability, the childhood you should have had. I can't give those back, but I can give you a place to figure out who you are without them. Jasmine cried then, the kind of crying that comes from deep places, from wounds that never properly healed. Eleanor held her while she sobbed, this woman who'd lost her husband and found purpose in mothering broken kids. Later, I showed Jasmine the workshop, asked if she wanted to learn carpentry. I'm not good with my hands, she said. Neither was I when I started. That's kind of the point. You learn. We started simple. I taught her to hammer nails straight. It took her 3 days and probably 100 bent nails before she got the rhythm right. But when she finally drove one in perfect, she smiled for the first time since arriving. I did it. You did. Want to try another? She spent that afternoon hammering nails into scrap wood. No project, no purpose except learning the skill. Frank had done the same thing with me. Sometimes you practice before you build. Sometimes the practice is the point. I taught them the way Frank had taught me. By doing, by showing up, by being patient with mistakes and celebrating small victories. by measuring twice and cutting once, by believing they were capable even when they didn't believe it themselves. Eleanor provided the emotional support I couldn't quite manage yet, the mothering they'd never had. She made sure they ate breakfast, asked about their days, listened to their dreams and fears. She became mom to a growing collection of kids who'd never had one. And slowly, watching these kids transform the way I'd transformed, I started to understand what Frank had been trying to teach me all along. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you give away. It's the part of yourself you invest in other people, the wisdom you share, the love you offer without expecting anything back. By the time my 17th birthday arrived in September of 2026, Merrick House was housing 4 residents. Marcus had moved out in August, ready to stand on his own, but he came back every Sunday to help with maintenance and mentor the newer kids. Jasmine was thriving, working part-time at the library and saving for her own place. 2 new residents had arrived, both with their own stories of system failure and hard starts. The farm was alive again, not just with crops and chickens and the work of maintenance, but with people, with second chances, with hope. Claire had become more than a friend somewhere along the way, though neither of us had put a name to it. She came to the farm most days after school, helping with dinner for the residents, tutoring anyone who needed it, just being present. We'd sit on the porch after everyone went to bed, talking about futures that felt possible now. "You're going to college next year," she said one October night. "Have you thought about where?" "I've got acceptances from Iowa State and University of Iowa. Both offer decent financial aid. But leaving feels wrong. The program's still new. Eleanor needs help. The residents need consistency. Cole, you can't put your life on hold forever. Frank wouldn't want that. I know. That's why I am thinking community college for the first 2 years. I can stay here, keep the program running, and transfer later. It's not giving up my future. It's just delaying parts of it." She smiled. "That sounds like something Frank would do. The practical choice that lets you honor your commitments. Is that bad? No, it's good. It's you being the man he taught you to be." The first anniversary of Frank's death had been brutal. September 24th, 2025 marked 1 year since we'd lost him. Eleanor and I had gone to the cemetery together, just the 2 of us, and stood at his grave not knowing what to say. The headstone was simple: Frank Merrick, beloved husband and father, United States Army, Vietnam veteran, builder of good things. We'd added that last line ourselves, because that's what he was, a builder of good things, good furniture, good houses, good farms, good people. I'd left my journal at his grave that day, the one he'd given me for Christmas. It was full now, every page covered with letters I'd written to him over the past year. Letters about grief and healing and the farm and the program we were building in his name. I'd left it there because I didn't need it anymore. I'd internalized his lessons. I carried him with me now in ways that didn't require writing it down. But I'd started a new journal because I still needed to process, to think, to remember. Just differently now. The second anniversary, the one coming up in just weeks, felt different. Not easier, but more settled. The grief had shifted from drowning to carrying, from something that incapacitated me to something I bore with acceptance. He was gone. That would always hurt, but the hurt had purpose now. On November 12th, 2026, I stood at Frank's grave again. 2 years since he'd left. 730 days of learning to breathe without him. But this time I wasn't alone. Eleanor was there, and Claire, and all 4 current residents of Merrick House. Marcus and Jasmine, who'd been with us nearly a year. Devin, a quiet 17-year-old who'd arrived in August. And Aisha, our newest resident, only 3 weeks in and still deciding whether to trust us. We'd made it a tradition, this annual gathering, a way to introduce the new kids to the man whose vision had created their second chance. A way to keep Frank alive, not just in memory, but in practice. The morning was cold, the kind of November cold that reminded you winter was coming, whether you were ready or not. We stood in a semicircle around the granite headstone, everyone clutching paper cups of Eleanor's hot chocolate. She'd insisted on bringing thermoses, said Frank would have wanted us comfortable while we visited. I spoke first, something I'd prepared but not written down. Words I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. "Dad, it's been 2 years, 730 days since you took your last breath, since we had to figure out how to keep breathing without you. Some days it's still hard, Some days I wake up and forget for a second that you're gone, and then I remember and it's like losing you all over again. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. But we did what you asked. We kept building, and I need you to see what we built. Really see it. I gestured at Marcus. This is Marcus Thompson. You would have liked him, Dad. He's stubborn like I was. Didn't believe anyone could help him because no one ever had. But he's in his second semester of tech school now, maintaining a 3.5 GP while working part-time as a mechanic's apprentice. He's saving money for his own place. He's building a life. Marcus cleared his throat. Thanks, Mr. Merrick, for teaching Cole so he could teach me, for starting all this. I'd probably still be sleeping in my car if you hadn't. I continued, and this is Jasmine Rodriguez. She's applying to four-year colleges for social work because she wants to help other kids like us. She works at the library now, Eleanor's old workplace. She's good with people, patient, kind. You would have approved of her. Jasmine's voice was quiet but steady. I never knew my dad. He left before I was born. But Cole talks about you sometimes, about the things you taught him, how to be patient, how to measure twice and cut once, how to believe broken things can be fixed. I'm learning those things too. Thank you for starting that. Devin spoke next, his first words at one of these gatherings. I'm new, only been at Merrick House 2 months, but I'm learning. Learning that maybe I'm worth something. Learning that people can help without wanting something back. Cole says you taught him that, so I guess you taught me too, even though we never met. Aisha didn't speak. She was too new, too raw, but she nodded when I looked at her, and that was enough. Eleanor spoke last, her voice steady even though tears streamed down her face. Frank, you left us too soon. I'm still angry about that. Probably always will be. But you left us with purpose. This farm, these kids, this program, it's all because you believed a scared 14-year-old boy was worth saving. She paused, collecting herself. You showed us what love looks like, not the fairy tale kind that lasts forever, not the easy kind that never hurts, the real kind, the kind that shows up even when it's hard, the kind that builds even when goodbye is coming. That's the kind of love these kids needed. That's the kind of love Cole learned from you. That's the kind of love he's giving away now. We stood in silence for a while. The wind picked up, rustling through the bare trees, carrying the smell of winter. Claire moved closer to me, her shoulder touching mine, a small gesture of support that meant everything. Finally, I spoke again. We're not done yet, Dad. Marcus is moving out next month, ready to stand on his own. But we've got 2 new residents starting in January. Kids who need what you gave me, a chance, a home, someone who believes in them. And I'm going to community college next fall. Kirkwood, studying agriculture and business management. Staying close so I can keep running Merrick House with Eleanor. Maybe transferring to Iowa State in a couple years, when things are more established. Building on the foundation before adding a second story, like you taught me. I pulled out my journal and read the entry I'd written that morning. Dad, people ask me all the time if I miss you. What a stupid question. Of course I miss you. I miss you every single day. I miss your voice and your patience and the way you'd look at a broken thing and see what it could be instead of what it was. I miss sitting in the workshop while you taught me about wood grain and joinery and the importance of good tools. I miss your terrible singing and your awful jokes and the way you'd ruffle my hair when I got something right. I miss all of it. But here's what I've learned. Missing you doesn't mean you're gone. You're in every straight nail I hammer, every board I measure twice before cutting, every kid I teach that broken doesn't mean useless. You're not gone, Dad. You're just different now. You're 1,000 small choices I make every day. You're the voice in my head that says, keep going when things get hard. You're the reason I believe in second chances. You're everywhere. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. After everyone else left, I stayed a while longer, just me and Frank in the November afternoon fading into evening. I sat on the ground beside his headstone, my back against the cold granite, and talked to him like I used to. I got my college acceptance letters, Dad. Iowa State, University of Iowa, even a partial scholarship to Iowa State for agricultural business. Eleanor thinks I should go. Claire thinks I should go, but I don't know if I'm ready to leave the farm, leave the program, leave everything we built. I paused, knowing he wouldn't answer, but needing to say it anyway. Here's what I'm thinking. Community college for 2 years, Kirkwood, right here in Cedar Rapids. I can study agriculture and business, keep living at home, Keep running Merrick House with Eleanor. Then maybe transfer to a 4-year school when the program's more established, when I'm more ready. The wind rustled through the trees, and I chose to interpret it as approval. You'd tell me that's the smart choice, right? The practical one? Measure twice, cut once, don't abandon my responsibilities just because something shinier came along. Build on the foundation before adding a second story. I pulled out my current journal and wrote a quick entry. Dad, today we brought the residents to meet you. Well, to meet your grave since they can't meet you. But I told them about you, about how you saved me, about how that's why we get to save them. Marcus asked if you'd be proud of what we built. I told him yes. I told him you'd be proud because we took your death and turned it into life for other people. That's what you would have wanted. That's what you asked for in that letter to Eleanor. Make my death mean something. Make it build something. We did, Dad. We built something beautiful. And we're not done yet. I closed the journal and stood up, brushing grass off my jeans. I've got to get back. Eleanor's making pot roast and the kids will eat everything if I'm not there to claim my share. But I'll be back. I'm always back. I touched the headstone one more time. I love you, Dad. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for staying. Thanks for teaching me how to build. The drive back to the farm took 20 minutes, and I spent it thinking about the past 2 years. About the grief that had nearly destroyed me and the work that had saved me. About Marcus and Jasmine and Devin and Aisha, all of them finding their way just like I had. About Eleanor, who'd lost her husband but gained a whole collection of kids to mother. About Claire, who'd stood beside me through the worst of it and hadn't flinched. About Frank, who'd given me 10 months and changed my entire life. When I pulled into the farm driveway, the house was blazing with light and life. Through the window, I could see everyone gathered around the dinner table. Eleanor bringing out the pot roast, Marcus saying grace even though none of us were particularly religious. It was just something we did now, something Eleanor had started. A moment to be grateful before we ate. I sat in the truck for a minute, just watching. This was what Frank had built. Not the barn roof or the porch or the fence. Those were just wood and nails. This, what I was looking at through that window, this was his legacy. A collection of broken people becoming whole. A place where showing up mattered more than where you'd been. A home built on the foundation of one man's refusal to let a scared kid stay lost. My phone buzzed. Claire texting from inside. You coming in or are you gonna sit in the truck all night being sentimental? I smiled and texted back. Sentimental. Obviously. This is who I am now. Her response was immediate. Good. Now get in here before Marcus eats your share. I climbed out of the truck and walked toward the house, toward the warm light and the noise and the family I'd found in the most unexpected way. Tomorrow I'd work on the fence that needed mending. I'd help Devin with his math homework and talk to Aisha about her job interview. I'd plan next semester's classes at Kirkwood and help Eleanor with the budget for Merrick House. But tonight, I'd just be here, present, grateful, alive in the life Frank had given me the tools to build. I opened the door and the noise hit me immediately. Marcus and Devin were arguing about football. Eleanor was telling Aisha about proper table settings. Claire was taking pictures of everything with the camera Eleanor had given her. Cole, Eleanor called out. Come say grace, it's your turn. I sat down at my spot, the one that used to be Frank's, and looked around at the faces gathered here. Some had been here for months, some for weeks. All of them were here because someone had decided they were worth saving. I bowed my head and the others followed. The words came easily now after months of practice. Thank you for this food, for this house, for each other. Thank you for second chances and hard work and people who show up. Thank you for the man who taught us that family isn't who you're born to, it's who chooses you. We choose each other. Every day. Amen. A chorus of amens, then the chaos of passing dishes and filling plates, and the comfortable noise of people who belong together. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the back porch looking out at the farm. 40 acres of purpose, barn, chicken coop, garden, fields. All of it maintained, all of it working, all of it meaning something beyond just property. Claire came out and sat beside me, 2 mugs of hot chocolate in her hands. Thought you might want this. Thanks. We sat in silence for a while, the comfortable kind that comes from knowing someone well enough that words aren't always necessary. Finally, she spoke. You know what Frank would say if he could see this, right? I smiled. He'd say we're doing good work. Then he'd point out 3 things we could improve. She laughed. Exactly. Measure 3 times, build it right, never stop improving. That's the thing about legacy, I said, surprised by my own insight. It's not static. It's not a monument you build and then leave alone. It's living. It grows and changes and gets better over time. Frank didn't leave me a finished product. He left me tools and knowledge and the belief that I could keep building. And you are. Yeah, I am. Another silence, then Claire asked the question I'd been avoiding. Are you happy, Cole? Really happy? I thought about it, turned the question over in my mind like one of Frank's carefully measured boards. Was I happy? Not in the uncomplicated way some people were happy. Not in the way that didn't carry grief and responsibility and the weight of other people's expectations. But yes, in the way that mattered, in the way that meant something. Yeah, I said, I'm happy. I'm doing work that matters with people I love. I'm building something that'll outlast me. I'm honoring the man who saved me by saving others. That's not just happy. That's purpose. That's legacy. That's everything Frank taught me about what makes a life worth living. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. He'd be so proud of you. I know, and that's enough. We sat there until the stars came out, until the November cold drove us inside, until the day officially ended and a new one waited to begin. A day when I'd wake up and keep building, keep showing up, keep being the man Frank Merrick had believed I could become. Because that's what you do when someone saves your life. You live it, fully, purposefully, gratefully. You take the tools they gave you and you build something beautiful. You take the love they showed you and you give it away to others. You keep building, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You keep building until the day you can't anymore. And then you hope you've taught someone else to carry on. That's legacy. That's love. That's what lasts. And I was just getting started. The farm would be here tomorrow. The residents would be here tomorrow. Eleanor would be here tomorrow. Claire would be here tomorrow. And I would be here tomorrow, hammer in hand, ready to build whatever came next. Because that's what Frank Merrick taught me. You show up. You do the work. You build something that lasts. And I would spend the rest of my life proving he was right to believe in me. Under the November stars, sitting on the porch of a house that had been abandoned and then restored, I made a promise to the man who wasn't there to hear it, but somehow felt close anyway. I'll keep building, Dad. For the rest of my life, I'll keep building. I promise. The wind picked up, rustling through the oak tree Frank and I had sat under on his last good day. And in that rustling, I heard his voice one more time. I know you will, son. I always knew you would. I went inside to the home we'd built together, to the life that was mine to live, to the future that stretched out full of possibility. And I was ready for all of it, because Frank Merrick had taught me how. And that was enough. That was everything.